The main character asks the guys what they think about reincarnation in another world, about adventures in a new mystical world with their cheating abilities. Or maybe there you can gather a harem of beautiful girls and enjoy the life of a real male. Or they will defeat the Demon King and become the savior of the whole world. At this time, the girl asked if Her Majesty was sure. The protagonist responded positively. At the same time, he continued to think that it sounded cool. He also agreed with it. But the reality turned out to be completely different. He was reborn. His name is Carmine de la Garde, Bungdart. He has 2 long gray hairs, and he has many soldiers under his command. This is his story of how he became an emperor. Here, the guy has light hair on his head, and the color of his eyes has clearly been changed. The protagonist opened his eyes, after which he thought about what was happening, where he was, who they were, and what they were saying. There really were 2 women in front of him who were talking to him. And Carmine also wondered who was screaming so loudly. His head was splitting from it. He wanted someone to shut him up. It turns out that he himself is the one screaming so loudly. He doesn't know if it was the result of his mental body not being quite in tune with his physical one. But the following days passed for him as if someone had put a movie on fast forward. Gradually, the outlines and colors became clearer. An understanding of language came. An understanding of the I in this new world. It was a very strange feeling. He wondered if his mother changed every day. Then he thought it was probably his nanny. Then he heard a word, after which he assumed it was his name, or was it his social status? Carmine thought that he felt something in the air that he had never felt before. He also saw some strange flashes that he tried to touch with his small hand. Several months passed. The protagonist continued to live in this house in the body of a small child. He woke up once again, after which tears appeared in his eyes. Carmine immediately began to cry loudly. One of the nannies picked him up and calmed him down. He cried a lot for no reason. Apparently, this is a feature of his age. After some time, he was sitting on the floor, holding different figurines in his hands. He thought to himself that this is what it means to be reborn. He imagined it differently. Then the main character thought about whether he should have been thrown somewhere to God, who would have given him cheating abilities. Nothing like that happened. Maybe it's all because of karma. First of all, he doesn't even remember how he died in his past life. And in general, his memories of his past life are vague. He remembers the faces of his parents and the rest of his family, but he can't remember their names, and his own name too. The protagonist didn't trust people, so in his past life he didn't really have any friends. At that moment, tears started flowing from his eyes. He thought that this body was always crying, no wonder. Carmine thought that it seemed to him that the emotional swings were only getting worse. Well, nothing could be done, and for now they would try to understand the situation as best they could. First of all, his name is Carmine de la Garde, Bungdart, and he's like the emperor of this Bungdart empire. The protagonist thought that the newborn child became the emperor. It can be assumed that the situation in the country is not very good. There are 2 people in power now. The first of them is Chancellor Karl de von Raoul, and the second is Master of Ceremonies Philippe de Gardecar. Apparently, both are not dukes with royal blood in their veins. Apparently, the empire is now being torn apart by their struggle for power. At all times, people in power are always in a struggle. He doesn't like it, but is it normal to make a child an emperor? Although something like this has already happened in history. He remembered that it was John I of the Capetian dynasty in France, 1317, Kingdom of France. When the king's father Louis X died, he left only his daughter Jean. She could not take the throne because the queen was pregnant. Therefore, the younger brother of Louis X became regent and waited for the birth. As a result, a boy named John was born, who became king immediately from birth. But, unfortunately, the boy died less than a week after his birth, and Louis's younger brother took the throne, becoming Philip V. The protagonist thought that this was not a very pleasant story. Then he remembered that a similar story happened in China, in the year 106, in the Eastern Han. After the death of the 4th Emperor He Han, Liu Long was received at court and enthroned as emperor. He was placed on the throne more than 100 days after his birth, and his relatives competed in politics, and a year later, he died unexpectedly. The protagonist immediately imagined this picture, how his relatives and other members of the royal family are fighting for power, and next to him is a huge spirit of death, which has already put its blade to his throat. Carmine thought that he didn't want to, because he had only just managed to be reborn. He wasn't asked if he wanted to be emperor, so why kill him now? There was no need to do that. At the same time, tears came to his eyes again. The nanny asked him what was the matter. Was he hungry? To which he tried to answer negatively. He began waving his hands and thinking that he did not want to be killed at all. Why kill him if he had only managed to be reborn? The protagonist thought that this something he felt when he was born was still floating in the air. He thought that it was somehow connected to him. Maybe it was something magical. This world reminds him of European fantasy. It is quite possible that there is magic here. Then he thought that he was reborn in another world. There must definitely be magic here. At this time, the nanny said that he was full of energy today. The protagonist did not listen. He thought that he did not know how to activate magic. He thought that it was worth trying to do it. Carmine was sitting on the floor. He raised his hands up, palms facing the ceiling, and then tried to say something so that the wind would respond to him. However, he couldn't talk, so he molded something in his childish language. The nanny was sitting next to him at the time. She was watching his movements carefully, and after he failed, she smiled sweetly at him. He thought about her stopping looking at him with a grin, after which he cursed. A few days later, it seems that the aristocrats are due to arrive today. He hopes that nothing will happen. If they want to assassinate him, they are unlikely to wait until he grows up. No matter how developed medicine is, the mortality rate in infancy is much higher than in adults. This means that an assassination attempt will be easier to disguise as death from illness. In other words, at this age, murder is easiest to hide. If they don't kill him, then it's more profitable for them to use him. He wondered if he would really have to live his whole life as someone's puppet. Carmine wondered whose puppet he would become. Usually those who want power always try to stand out. At that moment, his servant responded and said that they had gathered here to congratulate him on the new year. The protagonist looked ahead with determination. He thought that he would figure out the alleged criminals. At that time, his services turned to him and told him to accept their sincere congratulations. Carmine thought that reincarnation wasn't really in the game at all. He began to wonder if he could survive. After some time, the main character said that he was in touch. He learned the name of the country. He is the emperor of the Bungdard Empire. Another day came in fear of an assassination attempt. A little more time had passed since he had been reborn into this world. He had been reborn as a helpless infant, doomed to die at the hands of the aristocrats once he became displeasing to them. Carmine looked out the window and thought about how nice the weather was. He felt like a bird in a cage. He had no choice but to sit in his room, although usually cute princesses are in such a position. Then he saw through the window how one of them used magic on a small fountain. The protagonist saw magic for the first time in his second life. After only a moment, but he caught a bright flash of light. As a child, he was very surprised by this. Carmine stood by the window, his hands on the sill. He was wondering if it was really magic. He wanted to see more. At that moment, one of the nannies was standing behind him. The woman turned to him and then asked him if he wanted to go for a walk in the garden today. The protagonist immediately turned to her, fire burning in his eyes. He wondered if it was even possible to do this. Then Carmine thought that being stuck inside four walls was depressing. He needed to get out and freshen up from time to time. After some time, he was indeed taken outside. However, he was placed in a small chair where he was covered with a blanket. No other actions were taken with him. The protagonist thought that he knew that the emperor would not be allowed to just lie on the ground. These thoughts made him sad. He looked at his nanny and thought that she just wanted to relax and have some tea herself. Such a walk was no different from staying in the room. At that moment, he glanced at the previously mentioned fountain near which one of the maids used magic. The protagonist thought that this was definitely magic, but last time he failed. He wondered if maybe he could do something now. Carmine thought about the fact that there was always some metal in the air inside. He felt it since birth. It was probably somehow connected with magic. If he could somehow manipulate it to his liking, perhaps he would understand why he had no security. The image of a personal guard who was fully armored appeared before his eyes. He thought that he could definitely use it. The main character thought about at least having a textbook on magic, but he realized that he still couldn't read the local symbols. If he stood out too much, he would definitely be finished off. He imagined how the nanny found out that he could use magic. after which the unknown attacked him with a knife. The main character exhaled and thought that this was a dead end. He had nothing else to do, so he just decided to breathe some fresh air and look at the sky. After a while, he got tired of doing this. He closed his eyes and thought for a while. Then he decided to try using magic again and asked for water to appear in front of him. At that moment, he saw a small water ball in front of him, from which a glow emanated. The boy was very surprised by this, and the ball in due time fell to the ground and spread over it. The main character thought that it was water just now. Could he really have used magic? After that, he decided to remember his previous attempts that had not been successful. He wondered why this had happened before. Carmine was full of determination. He said that everything was fine, he had to try again. At that moment, the nanny turned to him and said that it was time to go back to the room. The main character did not expect this. He thought to himself that he needed a little more time. He needed to walk a little more. To which she said that they needed to go. Night fell in the mansion. The protagonist was lying on the bed. He looked very determined. He sat up on it, then pulled back the curtain to look around. There he saw that one of the maids, who was supposed to watch him and not sleep, was doing just the opposite. She was in a state of deep sleep. After this, the main character lowered his feet to the ground, thinking that in any case he was lucky, after which he again spread his arms in different directions and asked for water to appear. But this time, absolutely nothing happened. He looked up, then put his hand to his mouth and wondered why it worked in the garden, but not indoors. And then an idea came to him. It all looks like in this world not everyone can use magic, and magic itself can be used to assassinate him. The only way to prevent an assassination attempt is to prohibit the use of magic indoors. He doesn't know if it's some kind of magical tool or barrier, but it's in the room. And it's something he felt in the air that's blocking magic. Carmine has no idea how the magic of this world works. He doesn't know what its price is. Frankly, he doesn't understand anything about it. The main character will be able to study it only by learning the mythology of the legend of this world. If this is some kind of spirit magic, then he is out of luck. Carmine said that he would think about what could be done now, because he could study this thing. His body even trembled slightly. He is still a baby, so he defecates everywhere. He can't control it, there is nothing to be ashamed of. Although at first he was ashamed. But the nanny calmly offered to change his diaper. Of course, these aren't really diapers, but some kind of uncomfortable fabric. Obviously, in that case, every time he pees, they need to be changed. Nothing of the sort. At first after birth, he was very worried because he did not know what it was like to wear this instrument every day. But in the end, he decided to forget about it for now, because it did not cause any discomfort. Although if you think about it, things are strange. Now that he is convinced of the existence of magic, he is sure that this thing is a magical tool. This magical tool consists of a small tube and a tip. The tip is changed daily, and the tube is removed when bathing. The tool absorbs the discharge, so the diaper stays clean. Most likely, it is removed so that it does not sit in the water like the discharge. Apparently, it activates some kind of water absorption, compression, or transfer magic. However, I wondered why the magic of this tool works indoors. The key to unraveling the mystery of magic lies in it. In fact, this tip is not always replaced by exactly the same one. It comes in different shapes and has some kind of mark engraved on it. Perhaps this mark is something like a trademark of the craftsman. Carmine wondered if this magical tool was a one-time use and the master made it by hand each time. He didn't know how expensive it was, but it was probably damn expensive to buy them all the time. The main character grabbed his head and thought that it was real. He was the emperor, but it turns out that they were throwing so much money at him. Carmine wondered if this was normal, if people would rebel over such expenses. The guillotine was definitely awaiting him. The protagonist mentally apologized to his dear citizens. Now that's all he can think about. All he can do is wait and watch. After some time, he was in despair. He thought about what if there was a reserve of magical powers in this world, and this reserve becomes larger the more often a person uses magic. In this case, he must use magic every day. Carmine thought that it was unlikely that in this world he could open any system window to check his stats. Even if his powers increased, you wouldn't notice. But the main character still won't be able to use magic in the room. To train it, you need to go out into the garden. Carmine thought that he should definitely learn how to use magic, so he came up with a unique method. He cried. When the ever-caressing maid tried to calm him down, he cried when the nanny tried to calm him down. And only when they went out into the garden did he fall silent. So they got the idea in their heads that if they took him to the garden, he would stop crying. When no one was looking at him, he would practice magic and even understand it a little. First, he realized that magic power is inside the body. If you use the magic power in the body and air, then using magic is easy. It's a bit like collecting iron sand with a magnet. Magic power is easy to collect and easy to manipulate. If you use magic power only from the air, it's hard to control magic and it's impossible to practice. Secondly, he figured out the stock of magic power. They probably want to ask him whether the total stock of magic power in the body increases. He did not find out. In the fantasy dimension, it is very inconvenient without a system. However, when he used the magic power from his body, it seemed to him that it was almost not decreasing. At least, that was how he felt, so it is not certain. But he thinks that the magic power reserve is not running out. The protagonist thought that maybe the thing is that while the magical power and body are used to start the spell, the power from the air was used to activate it. Thirdly, he learned about magic itself. He managed to use magic once. His perception of the world helped him understand how magic works in general. For example, it was easier to create a ball of water the day after rain. But after sunny days, on the contrary, it took a lot of time to implement. He knows that there is water in the atmosphere. So, probably with the help of magic, he unconsciously collected his water into water balls. In the end, everything depended on the humidity of the air. And Carmine also learned to create ice with magic, and it didn't depend on temperature or humidity. He created it out of nothing. From this, we can draw several conclusions about magic. Firstly, the magic in the body, which directly starts the magic, depends on the magic in the air. This process is no different, regardless of the type of magic. But then, there is a difference. Magic that creates water. Magic power in the air collects water from the atmosphere into a water ball. Magic that creates ice. Magic power in the air itself becomes ice. Because of his perception that water is created by a natural phenomenon, the magic power collects water from the atmosphere. And he perceived the creation of ice from anime games, so the magic power itself took the form of ice. But Carmine is not yet sure which method is better. Perhaps he will be able to dispel his idea of creating water over time. Now it is better to focus on the new magic. He must use other spells as well. Before the people who decided to keep him alive for now change their minds, he will become stronger. A few days later, on the same day, he was also taken out into the garden. The weather was wonderful. No precipitation was expected. Carmine thought about how the use of magic is blocked indoors, why magical tools work despite the blocking of magic, how the reserve of magical power works, and whether it is bottomless, how perception affects magic. Many questions that have no answers yet. But he wants to finally rejoice. For the first time since his reincarnation, for the first time he will do what he wants. He was still sitting in this child's chair, arms outstretched. He thought about magic, after which he clenched his fists, came to his place and thought that she was his ray of hope. Emperor is the title of a monarch, a king among kings, a head of state ruling over several nations. The title of a true ruler. At least that's what he remembered. At that moment, the nanny handed him a spoon with food and told him to open his mouth. Carmine obeyed her and then ate the contents. He thought that the emperor was currently being looked after by a maid. There is a reason for this. By the age of 2, he has grown considerably, and now he can move around on his own. His teeth have grown too. After that, he picked up a small spoon and thought that now he could eat by himself. At that moment, the spoon fell out of his hand onto the floor. He and the nanny looked at it in surprise. The main character immediately began to cry. The nanny came up to him to wipe his face with a handkerchief, after which she told His Majesty not to hurry, she could feed him for now. He thought about how he was trapped in the body of a 2-year-old child, still too weak and not ready for independent life. So he has to continue playing the role of an unsuspecting child. And he doesn't like it at all, especially the fact that he is being courted by beautiful maids. He is serious about these thoughts. He also finally started talking. Of course, he speaks at a level that doesn't arouse unnecessary suspicion. He just speaks one letter at a time, or some short words. If people found out that he could already communicate at an adult level, he would have problems. so he limited himself to phrases of a few words. He imagined a picture of the killer behind him, suspecting him of being smart. Still, it's nice to finally have a chance to chat a little. To ask a question. Their stories are the most important source of information for him, because there is no one else who could tell him about this world. One day, a situation happened. He was listening to a dialogue between two maids. One of them was saying that she had heard the master of ceremonies talking about certain things. At that moment, the main character tugged her sleeve. Carmine, looking like a very interested child, asked her who this man was. To which the girl answered with a smile that he was an acquaintance of his grandfather. When a child asks them something, they always answer. He can ask simple questions. But this is good compared to the time when he was still the owner. It is good that he can at least collect the necessary information. Besides, since he was a small child, they often gossiped around him. He thought that it was at least unprofessional to gossip in front of his emperor. And then he seriously thought about never stopping them from doing this. It's a very valuable source of information. Carmine was thinking about how recently some old man started coming into his room. At that time, someone called him and asked if he was there or not. He thought about how he had only mentioned the devil. This grandfather turned out to be Prime Minister Karl de Van Raoul. He spread his arms out to the sides and said that he was very glad to see the main character in good health. The maids often gossip about this man. They say that he is now the person who has the most power in this country. And as the Prime Minister, he takes a direct part in the political life of the country. Carmine thought about the fact that it was not the emperor who should have the highest power. It dawned on him that the emperor was just a puppet. The man is also called Lord Raoul, and he controls almost all of the country's politics. From the point of view of the Master of Ceremonies faction, he uses his position to line his own pockets. By the way, Raoul is his relative. To be precise, he is the eldest son of his great-grandfather's brother, and also the brother of his late great-grandmother. That is, Carmine's grandfather, the previous Emperor Edward VI, and his grandmother, his wife, were first cousins. By the way, before his grandparents' wedding, marriages between cousins were prohibited and considered a criminal offense. The protagonist wondered why their marriage was approved. He doesn't know the details at the moment, but Carmine thinks it's definitely connected to the fact that Carl's younger brother is the head of the local religion, His Holiness, George V, and these men do everything to strengthen the position of the family. That is why they have bent not only politics, but also religion to suit themselves. The protagonist thought that there was another old man. Then someone asked again if His Majesty was here. It turned out to be Grandpa Master of Ceremonies, Philip de Gardekar. He immediately greeted the main character with a slight smile on his face. Philippe de Garde, Akikar, is his grandfather. He's called Lord Akikar. Li is a great lord. Every lord in his country owns his own territory. This old man is also one of his relatives. He is his mother's father, so he is his maternal grandfather. According to the Prime Minister's faction, this man is manipulating the now Dowager Empress, increasing the number of government posts and hindering the development of politics. A man gives out government positions to members of his faction, which he himself invents. Of course, each of these positions receives a salary from the treasury. In this way, he drags money from the treasury into the pocket of his faction. Both men always come in and say that they welcome His Majesty, then say nasty things to each other and leave. Carmine thought that, from his point of view, it was not a good thing to say to a child. I think it was called imprinting. In general, both of these factions, the Prime Minister faction and the Master of Ceremonies faction, are fighting for the balance of power in the Empire. However, at the moment, it seems that the Prime Minister's faction has the advantage. For now, the scales are tilted more in his favor. The protagonist thought that it was not at all clear why this was happening, since the position of regent was held by a person from the faction of the Master of Ceremonies. Despite the close family connection, Carmine does not belong to the faction of the Master of Ceremonies. The regent's job is to help the young emperor until he comes of age. The regent is the daughter of the Master of Ceremonies. His mother is named Ecclesia, but she hasn't come to him for a long time. Her second child, who was born recently, died of illness, so she doesn't leave her room. By the way, the main character forgot to mention that his father, Crown Prince Jean, died before he was born. He heard that he allegedly died in battle, but he suspects that it was an attempt on his life. The situation is that now his mother simply left him alone and locked herself in the room, and her recent child was conceived in a relationship with some aristocratic lover. It seems that he was her lover while her father was alive. Although they say that the child died of illness, it looks suspicious. He was, after all, the second potential heir to the throne, and now his mother seems to often lose consciousness after long nights of mourning her son. The protagonist assumes that the child was most likely killed by the grandfather, the master of ceremonies. He even feels a little sorry that everything happened this way. By the way, although vague, he still has memories of his mother from his past life. The difference between them is colossal. He can't bring himself to call Akalisha his mother. He doesn't feel anything for her. Maids often talk about all this. If maids know, then most likely other people guess too. The main character thought that this is some kind of doomed country. He thinks that this is a disgrace, not a country. Carmine thought that he hadn't seen his nannies for a long time either. And the thing is that now he no longer needs to be breastfed. The protagonist thought about how so many people had taken care of him during this period of time. 7 independent nannies, 10 maids from the Prime Minister's faction, and 10 maids from the Master of Ceremonies faction. Carmine closed his eyes and thought about how all the nannies were independent aristocrats. To be honest, he even felt a little sorry that they were no longer with him. Independent nobles are nobles who do not belong to any faction. Although there are few of them, they have decisive votes in the court. Most of them are officials who do not own their own territory. Unlike Raoul and Akikar, who manage their own land holdings, many of the aristocrats in their factions also have land holdings. The protagonist thought that if he ever interfered in political life, the first people who would support him would be the aristocrats. In the event of the collapse of the empire, independent aristocrats will find themselves in the most disadvantageous position. Without belonging to one of the factions, they will be left with nothing. That's why many independent aristocrats have recently started to join one of the sides. Otherwise, they risk losing everything. The protagonist thought that this world is also cruel. Carmine thought that without the help of independent aristocrats, it would be better not to get involved in politics, since the risks were too high. He again remembered the faces of his nannies and told himself that it was not worth getting into politics yet, and that there was also a high infant mortality rate in this world. And in the context of a power struggle between two factions, if the emperor died in the arms of a nanny who belonged to one of the factions, that faction would be held accountable. The main character of Slay's expressionless face and thought that even if it were not murder, children in this world often die from diseases. And if Carmine dies, they'll have to choose a new emperor, and the side that would be responsible for his death wouldn't be able to put their puppet on the throne. The chances are almost zero. Therefore, the only people from the faction around him are the maids who take care of him in shifts. He is surrounded only by potential enemies. The protagonist thought that they were not going to take the initiative and teach him. He looked at them so intently that one of the maids asked him if something had happened, to which Carmine, with a sweet smile on his face, replied that nothing had happened. Everything was fine. He thought to himself that it was inappropriate to call them enemies. They had been dragged in just as much as he had been. After all, it was the people in power who started this mess. The situation in the empire is such that ordinary people have no choice but to follow their lead. He will never forgive the Prime Minister and the Master of Ceremonies for wanting to use him. That is why he did not like people in power in his previous life. Did Carmine reincarnate just to obey them? Why didn't he open his eyes in the body of some high-ranking aristocrat? The main character was given the ability to wield magic. He can use it to simply survive, or he can try to escape with its help. He wondered if he could become invisible. After that, Carmine decided that he would run away as soon as he reached adulthood. He would not mind living like a normal person. The protagonist thinks that it is better this way than living in fear that he could be killed at any moment. His life could be much calmer, freer. Therefore, he will continue to increase his magical power. His enemies will see that he is capable of many things, being an ordinary person. He clenched his fists and told himself that he will not dance to their tune. After some time, dangerous shells fell to the ground, which exploded upon contact with the ground. The main character was very tired. He tried to catch his breath. He also introduced himself and said his name, after which Carmine jumped to his feet and addressed the enemy with the words that he must stop him now. It turned out to be a huge dragon. At that moment, the monster decided to attack him with its fire at full force. The main character managed to escape the fire attack. He jumped back a decent distance to turn around in the air and head towards the dragon. The latter attacked Carmine with fire again. But this time he did not hide. He took the attack on himself, cutting it with his sword. Then he jumped towards his enemy and, saying that he was finished, decided to attack him himself. It turns out that it was a dream. The protagonist woke up in his royal room. There was saliva in the corner of his mouth. He sat up in bed, then looked around. There was no one in the room. Carmine rubbed his face with both hands, and then, without taking them away from his eyes, he thought that everything was clear to him. It was such a peculiar dream. He disguised himself as the emperor of this country. His name is Carmine. He is the emperor, and he is 3 years old. With such a status, his dream of a great adventure is not destined to come true. After that, he got off the bed and thought that he would have to practice magic today. He started using it by accident and has been practicing ever since. The amount of magic he can use is gradually increasing. The protagonist thought that he had already learned to master the magic of several elements. He wondered if this was an advantage of reincarnation. It's so nice to finally be able to move your body freely and be able to use magic. It's so cool, like unlocking achievements in a game. Of all the magic, there are 2 types he'd like to focus on. The first is the magic that allows you to move things through the air. He called it magical manipulation. Basically, it's just telekinesis. Quite a handy thing, actually. He moved the leaf through the air and smiled. So far, he can only control something light. For example, a small stone or a leaf. And he also noticed something strange. It is much easier to control people created with the help of magic and a lump of earth torn out by earth magic. The protagonist thought about it again, and thought that it might be because the object's volume and mass were created with his magic. But he still doesn't really understand this point. Carmine thought that it would be great if one day he could do things like attack with telekinesis. It might look useless, but it could still help. The second is magic that manipulates the body, which he learned to use when he tried to freeze things. Freezing magic can be used when you simply imagine the object being frozen. But without understanding what heat energy is and imagining how it works, the magic will have no effect. Ice-making magic is quite simple. Besides, in the process of practicing freezing magic, he learned the opposite, and now he can heat things. Surely Carmine has much more to learn. His body is extremely weak, because he is still a small child, and there is a high probability that he will catch a cold and die before an attempt is made on his life. So in this regard, this magic is convenient and useful for temperature regulation. It allows you to easily keep cool in summer and warm in winter. And the most important thing is that the main character discovered that converting magical energy into heat is much easier and more efficient than creating a flame. Simply put, you can get more heat with less magical power. It took 3 times more magical power to create the flame than it did to just create the heat energy. The protagonist looked up. He used telekinesis magic again. So a ladder was flying in the air. He thought about the magical energy becoming hot, then pointed his finger towards the object. A magical beam burst out of it, burning through the leaf, leaving behind charred edges. Carmine learned the heat beam attack. Finally, at age 3, he gained an attack ability. But the protagonist thought that this method of attack does not give an immediate effect, since it is necessary to continuously radiate the target. Carmine raised a finger to his chin and thought that he couldn't defend himself that way. He would have to find a better way. First of all, he needs to learn to better manage the magical power in his body. Internal magical power is essentially the initial fuel for activating magic. Carmine has learned to store and contain internal magic within his body without activating magic. This is a good exercise for practicing controlling magical power. It may just be his imagination, but he feels like the concentration of magic power inside his body is higher than the concentration of magic power in the air. Although he can't say for sure, the protagonist became very serious. He thought that his training was definitely paying off due to all this. Outside the window, night had fallen. Stars appeared in the sky. He thought about how he still couldn't cast spells indoors. The protagonist was lying in bed, covered with a blanket. His eyes were open. He had a plan. He sat up in bed, then pulled back the curtain to examine the situation. There he saw that one of the maids was sleeping again. He wondered if she was working at all. His security was, of course, useless. He fears every day that he might be killed. Magic will become the main factor in his survival. He thinks that invisibility or illusions can be useful, so he desperately tries to learn something like that. But to activate magic in this world, he needs to have a clear idea of what he wants. To create fire and ice, he imagines a clear picture of fire and ice. But how can Carmine even imagine transparency or illusion? How does it even work? How can he create an illusion? In his past life, he always had Google at hand. The maid continued to sit on the chair and sleep, and a large bubble blew out of her nose. The protagonist decided to sum up what he knew. Rules of Carmine's magic. Activation depends on natural phenomena. Correct presentation is important for use. He can maintain magical power in his body even indoors. Without presentation, it will not be possible to recreate. By the way, he wears this improvised diaper only at night. He is already 3 years old, so he can go to the toilet on his own. But before removing it completely, he would like to study this mechanism thoroughly. By the way, toilets in this world are also flushable, but not like in the previous world. It is a small square toilet, and inside there is something like a water pipe. Carmine was a little surprised because he had heard that there were no flush toilets in medieval Europe. But there was something like a flush toilet in Rome, so maybe it wasn't that surprising after all. The protagonist held a part of his diaper in his hands and thought that from his previous observations, he assumed that there is some kind of magic built into the tip. The magic is activated by some mechanism in the tip itself. He's not sure, but it's possible that there's some kind of magic circle engraved there. He has an idea of the approximate structure, but he would still like to have a clearer idea. However, with his current knowledge of this world, he can only imagine everything primitively. If Carmine were to examine it now, the object would begin to emit light that could wake up the maid. What is more important to know now is the magical power that hovers in the air. The protagonist wondered if he could use magic on the tip. Then he closed his eyes, turned to the magical power, and asked it to warm up. After that, a flash of light appeared in the air, and the tip itself began to glow, which greatly surprised Carmine. He looked at the object, his eyes wide open. He thought about what was happening and wanted to experiment further. The boy took the tip with one hand and then placed it against his fully open other palm. He looked very serious and focused. There was a small trace of the pattern on the part left on the skin. He concluded that the tip had indeed heated up. It turns out that there really is magical power inside. Due to some kind of anti-magic barrier, presumably created by a magic tool, he can't use his magic in the room. But he did discover something curious. The magical power in the air is blocked. There are not even any echoes. Something does not allow it to work. When Carmine uses magic, he uses the magical power in the air to transform it into some kind of phenomenon. It's like molding something out of clay. He again confirmed the given example that it really suits the situation, and then added that if, for example, he wants to do shaven, clay is a magical force. Then he needs it to mold it into shaven. Shaven is the final magic. It turns out that he gets ice from magical force, just as he gets shaven from clay. If you dry out the clay, you won't be able to mold anything from it. And it won't be of any use. It will become useless. The magic power in this room is blocked. Nothing can be done with it, so he can't use magic. But the magic power in his body can move like in, and the magic power in magic tools. But the magic power in the air is useless. This is a big discovery for him. If the magic power from the air is not used, then the activation of magic is possible. Therefore, there is no magic tool in this room that prohibits the use of all magic. These 2 points change a lot. The protagonist cannot launch something created with magic into the room. With his current methods of activating magic, he will not be able to defend himself. Here he stopped his train of thought. When he examined the magical instrument, he noticed for a moment a surge of magical power from within. So, the magical power released into the air is not immediately blocked. It turns out that if Carmine releases magical power from his body, it won't be for long, but his spell will still be able to fly some distance. And if a killer suddenly gets into this room, he will be able to react. The protagonist immediately imagined using his flash to stop the killer from doing his job. He wondered if it would work, so Carmine had found a way to defend himself. He needed to test it out just in case. The protagonist narrowed his eyes and then thought that it was easy to control her in the body. The problem was how to make her surge. He told himself to imagine the magical power inside his body functioning like a liquid, passing through his muscles and skin, tiny particles of magic. Looking at his palm, The protagonist saw small glowing pieces of magic there. He decided that this was what he needed. Carmine closed his eyes and thought that now he needed to convert these objects into thermal energy. When he opened his eyes, he saw that his whole hand was glowing brightly. He even opened his mouth and widened his eyes in surprise. After that, he was happy that he had succeeded. The main character said that he had a strong concentration of magical power in his body. His hand was really hot. Suddenly, something changed. Carmine stared at his hand, which was filled with magical power. However, after a moment, all reality began to distort, as if rippling. He immediately fell to his knees on the bed. Sweat began to pour down his body. He wondered what was happening, why he felt so weak. The protagonist turned pale. He thought that everything was clear to him. This was happening because the magical power in his body was exhausted. After that, he fell on the bed and lost consciousness because he had no strength left. When the inner magical power runs out, a person loses consciousness. Carmine learned a lot today. After some time, the protagonist opened his eyes. There were many people around him. He thought about what was going on, why it was so noisy. The doctor was talking to the holy servant. Carmine remembered that he had tested whether he could use magic indoors, and then his magic power ran out, causing him to fall asleep. The main character thought that, it turns out, the court doctor immediately rushed to see if everything was okay with him. The man approached him and, calling the tree Majesty, asked how he felt, to which the boy smiled sweetly and said that everything was fine. After this, the main character looked at his hand and thought that it seemed to him that part of his magical power had already been restored. Perhaps in this world, humans have an organ that generates magical power. In any case, he has no choice but to learn everything through trial and error. Here the protagonist heard some chatter off to the side. Turning his gaze, he saw that one maid was scolding another maid who was sleeping in his room. Carmine thought that it was the girl's own fault that she was asleep. But being able to use magic indoors was very useful, although he didn't expect such a strong feeling of weakness to attack him. The protagonist put his hand to his mouth and thought about how magic that would make him faint immediately after using it was clearly not practical. But wasn't he increasing his internal supply of magic power? Carmine closed his eyes and thought that perhaps it was just a coincidence that he had lost consciousness. It was sunny outside, flowers were in full bloom. Some time had passed since then, and he was allowed to go out into the yard. On this day, he decided to practice a little light magic that would not wake the maid. At that moment, the latter stood behind him and made it clear that she was there. The boy shuddered and immediately removed his magic. Carmine saw her small flare. He was worried that she might notice. The maid said that you can't pick up things from the floor. She looked very unhappy. The main character immediately spread his arms out to the sides and said with a very sweet smile that he had not lifted anything. But you could tell he was nervous. The maid immediately leaned towards him. Their faces were opposite each other at close range. He once again confirmed his words. Then the girl straightened up and said that everything was fine. In that case, the girl told him seriously that she needed to clean up, so he should behave well. The boy agreed with her. The girl also told him not to pick up any junk or trash from the floor. He again agreed with her. Having already moved away from him at a decent distance, the maid said that if something happened, he should call her immediately. Carmine agreed with her. When the girl left him, he put his hand to his chest and thought that if he had waited a little longer, she would have realized that he could cast a spell. The protagonist dispersed the magical power in the air and did not lose consciousness. This surprised him. Carmine closed his eyes, went into himself a little, after which his whole body began to glow with magic. He thought that the amount of magical power in his body was growing after all. The protagonist looked at the object that had formed between his hands and thought that now, when he activated the magic, he could immediately dispel it. His eyebrows drew together. He thought about how he could also suck magical power out of the air. Now Carmine knows how to quickly restore his magic power. But after absorbing it, there is such a feeling of satiety and fullness inside. This moment confuses him a little. The protagonist has been practicing for several days. Light magic uses magical power to increase and decrease the brightness and maintain light emission. The moment the maid approached him, he tried to quickly dispel the magic and ended up wasting his magic power. At least that's what he thought. That magical power was fluid back then. He imagined it as a small particle and how he took it into his body. The protagonist also learned to activate magic indoors. He imagined how particles of magic passed through his skin and muscles. Carmine smiled at his thoughts, because this image managed to do it. He called this little magical force, magical essence. When the feeling of fullness appears, it means that the magical power from the air is filling his body. How much magical power can be in it depends on the body's ability. His limit of magical power is still low. The protagonist thought about what he should do. He thought that maybe it had something to do with the fact that he felt the difference between the magical power inside his body and the magical power outside. It was as if different magical particles were merging into one big one in his body. Carmine thought that everything was clear to him. It was like the process of digestion. It seemed that the magic power in the body was much more concentrated than in the air. When he used magic manipulation, the feeling of being overwhelmed disappeared. It requires a lot of concentration, but it will greatly help in casting magic indoors. Carmine called it a restoration technique. However, it is not an advantage if other mages know about it too. Well, by the way, since he is a puppet emperor, he is unlikely to receive a decent education. He has no choice but to educate himself. In fact, the main character has no desire whatsoever to become an emperor. But the role of a monarch was thrown at him without asking whether he needed it at all. Lately, he had seen many more aristocrats looming before his eyes. Thus, one of them addressed him by name and said that he was his faithful servant, and then introduced himself. The protagonist looked at him and thought that perhaps this old man was another big shot, an influential aristocrat of the empire. But what's the point of visiting the boy while he's still a kid? Carmine is still too small. His face and name don't last a day in his memory. The Chancellor's men call him the Great Count Raoul, and the Master of Ceremonies is simply called Akakar. Onba, they are quite stern men. The people of the Master of Ceremonies call the Chancellor simply Count Raoul, and their leader, Sancta Kikar. And in both cases, only those who adhere to a neutral position do not add anything to the names. There are also people whose official position differs from their actual position. But the fact that Carmine has learned to distinguish who belongs to which faction is already a huge progress. The protagonist was lucky that he learned this before he started talking formally to the aristocrats. Then, one of the maids called out to him. She said that they needed to return to the room. He smiled and answered her in agreement, after which they headed along the corridors of the estate to the room. There are always maids around him. They all seem to be daughters of lower aristocrats. Apparently, they work as servants and in exchange receive an education. And naturally, they are a very valuable source of information because each of them loves to gossip. But more importantly, they see him as a child, not a puppet like other people. He is an adult inside, so he has mixed feelings about it, but he is still grateful. Thanks to this, the girls answer any question asked of them. Naturally, so far only simple questions about what it is, but they are unlikely to help him with politics. It is still too early for him to ask about that. By the way, it's very convenient that maids from different factions take care of him. They don't work together, and each of them has different information. Every day the girls change. Since he was reborn, he already knows a lot, including unnatural things for his young age. For example, he knew how to use the toilet. He figured it out the moment he saw it. After that, he cursed and thought that he hoped the maids wouldn't suspect anything, since no one had taught him how. After that situation, he was told that the main character had obviously been taught by other maids. At the same time, the girl smiled sweetly at him. Presumably, the maid meant a maid from another faction. Thanks to this, he did not arouse any suspicion. The ancient empire of Lothar fell, and therefore its territory was divided into several countries that often fought among themselves. This time was called the Era of Civil Strife. At the same time, a distant relative of the last emperor of the empire, Lothar, gathered his people and founded a new empire, declaring that his country had inherited all the rights and power of the previous empire. He called it the Empire of Bungdalt. By the way, the imperial palace consists of several palaces. Each new emperor for some reason builds a new palace. Such is the tradition. Nowadays, the territory has grown so much that people can even move around it by carriage. The protagonist thought that he could only move around in this mansion. But someday, he would see the world. The mansion he lives in was built by the 6th emperor. It is clearly quite large. Indeed, despite the fact that it has only one floor, it occupies a large area. Carmine is still small, and he thinks that this mansion is too big. Apparently, this place used to be the residence of the emperor's son. and the seventh emperor, that is, his grandfather, lived here. The seventh grandfather, Emperor Edward VI, was the father of his father, Crown Prince Jane. Carmine doesn't even know what he looks like, but he certainly won't complain about the house where his grandfather lived. In his past life, he didn't remember his grandfather either. He wasn't in his life. The main character smiled sadly and thought that the situation was similar in this world. And recently he heard something important. To become an emperor, one must go through 2 ceremonies, receiving the title of Crown Prince and ascending the throne. Only then will the emperor officially take the throne. But Carmine is a direct relative of the emperor, meaning he was born as one. So these 2 ceremonies have been postponed for now. So the master of ceremonies and the prime minister are fighting over who will be his regent. That is, who will conduct the ceremony of becoming the crown prince, and which of the 2 will place the crown on his head. Whoever crowned Carmine would be second only to the emperor himself in power. After which he decided that it didn't matter to him. Let them squabble as much as they wanted. The main character lacks knowledge and many other things, but everything is going according to his plan to survive in this country. He decisively clenched his hand into a fist and said that they can do whatever they want with this country, and he will run away at this time. Carmine was very angry and serious. He imagined himself standing between these 2 terrible men, and in his head there was only one thought, that he would survive. The main character was reborn in this world 4 years ago, the ruler of an empire that could be torn apart by internal strife at any moment. At first he fell into despair, but now he has hope. Magic. Carmine clenched his fist and thought that he would definitely escape from this hellish place. He did not even consider staying. The maid called out to him and said that she had brought a suit. The suit she had brought was tailored especially for him, but he would only wear it once. Such a waste. Carmine thought that he could, of course, dress himself, but it would be better not to show it. He wasn't alone in the bathroom either, by the way. If they brought him a suit, then it turned out there was a reason. The main character grinned, scratched his chin, and thought that this would be his first public appearance. Because Carmine was small, and because of his condition, he was not allowed to leave the house. No matter what awaits the main character today, he is glad that he will finally be able to go beyond the yard. The door opened, after which Carmine went out into the street and saw that a harnessed carriage was already waiting for them. He thought that even such a transport had been provided to him. The main character turned to the maid and asked if they were really going to go on this, to which the girl answered him positively with a smile. After which they sat down and went to the place they needed. Carmine was thinking about how the carriages shook so much. It was amazing. It felt like some kind of ride, very fun. Then something dawned on him. The protagonist thought about the fact that they got out, so it's even good. And God bless her with the carriage. He wonders why he is happy about it, like a child. Did Carmine's physical age somehow affect his psychological age? He remembered all those moments when he could cry for no reason and become more emotional than necessary. After that, he scratched his eyes and thought that most likely it was. It was terribly annoying him. Then the maid informed him that they had arrived. The carriage stopped immediately. First, a girl came out of it, after which she turned around, gave her hand to the main character, and helped him down. Then they headed towards the house. It turned out that there was a church in front of him. It was quite large, it had huge doors. He came a little closer. Looking around inside, he thought about the fact that there was a picture of Coral and some leader. He doesn't have any particular religious beliefs, but he doesn't like such places, and it's too pretentious. And the same problem with Carmina's throne. They went too far with the decorations. He doesn't like it. He wondered if no one in this country had any taste. After that, the protagonist thought that it was not really that important right now. He tugged the maid's sleeve to get her attention. Carmine made a very sweet face and asked the girl what was going on there, to which she replied that there was a funeral today. He asked her about it again. The maid answered him positively, explaining that it meant seeing off the deceased. The main character thought to himself that he knew all this. Then the boy asked her whose funeral it was. She hesitated a little. He wondered what it was, whether the master of ceremonies or the prime minister had died. That would be nice. However, the girl answered differently. She said that it was Norn Alman. Carmine thought to himself about who this person even was. Then the main character was told that this was the funeral of his grandfather's concubine. The latter was shocked by her answer. After some time, they ran into the grandfather. The man told Carmina that they had not seen each other for a long time. The latter thought to himself that he was acting as if he were the ruler of the country. Out loud, he asked him about the concubine. Then they explained to him that when his grandfather, the emperor, died, everyone was overcome with terrible grief, and Carmina's mother locked the two concubines in a dark tower. The boy thought about something he understood. When his father died, since his mother was pregnant, there was a possibility that the concubines could also become pregnant. So she locked them up, and even when it turned out that they were not pregnant, the woman did not let them out. It seems that one of them died, so they decided to have a funeral. The protagonist looked around and realized that he did not see the regent here. It seemed that even his people were not here. Carmine thought that it was clear to him that he seemed to be here to be drawn into political games. He looked at his grandfather and thought that he wanted to see what he was up to. The main character said with a sad expression that he felt sorry for the concubine. He thought to himself that this was really the reaction a man was expecting, and the grandfather smiled evilly and said that this was absolutely true. The man also told Carmine that this woman had killed his 2-year-old brother, and she was just a servant, not an aristocrat. This is unfair and terrible. The protagonist wondered if he really had a half-brother who was the heir before he was born. Then he wondered what problems there might be if his mother was an aristocrat. Carmine looked closely at the man standing in front of him and thought that he was clearly not telling the whole story, but he clearly wanted to get the regency. From what he heard, his grandfather should have been alive when his father died. As a result, he lost his son while he was alive, and his grandson was killed. Was Carmine's grandfather killed when he tried to take action after his grandson's death? He could well have been killed by the master of ceremonies men. If you think about it, it was obvious that it wasn't just for nothing that the family members died one after another. He tensed up at his own thoughts. The protagonist imagined a huge spirit of death standing behind him, holding a scythe. He turned around and thought that if he let his guard down, he could die quickly. The main character and the maid were sitting on a bench waiting. Then they saw a man in a cassock come in and say that he would be conducting a funeral today, saying that his name was Bishop George. There was no sign of regret in his eyes. He said that they would now honor the deceased with a minute of silence. Carmine remembered that he was the minister's younger brother. George raised his hands up, spread them out in different directions, and began his sermon. Apparently, the main religion in this empire is the Holy Way. By the way, when he spoke, the aristocrats sitting behind him were chatting loudly, probably spreading rumors. This happens when people like concubines or, in extreme cases, the emperor die. The head of state affairs and the head of religion aren't cahoots. Her death only plays into their hands. The sermon, although not directly, will show who the church supports and allow it to control the rest. Carmine thought that they say that politics and religion go hand in hand. In any case, listening to the bishop was very useful for him. A saint named Ain heard the voice of God. However, he thought it might be magic, so he didn't believe it at first. No matter how many times God showed him a miracle, he didn't believe it. Then, God made him the chosen one. In other words, he gave him power. Ain used it to perform various miracles and finally believed in God. And then, he created a teaching to bring the word of God to the masses. But when he tried to talk about God, he was driven away from everywhere because they considered him a liar and a sorcerer. And then, under the guidance of the voice of God and with a couple of people who believed him, he set sail. They encountered many difficulties during their journey, but the power given by God allowed them to overcome them all. Finally, they arrived on another continent, the Promised Land. The teaching that Saint Aang continued to spread on the new continent grew considerably. Thus, a new path emerged. Now Carmine understands what is depicted on the stained glass windows of the church. Thanks for this, I must say. I will tell the men. He thought about the divine power bestowed upon Ainu. Then the protagonist remembered how the man was exiled, after which he went with his followers on a sea voyage. How Ain and his people reached the Promised Land. Carmine thought seriously about how different this was from his world. At that moment, the bishop said that they would have a final farewell, after which he suggested that they approach the coffin. The main character said that he had never met her, but he was sure that the woman was definitely unlucky with her life. Even when she died, she was used for a political game. Besides the fact that Carmine heard about his father's death from every corner, this is the first death he sees with his own eyes in this world. And he doesn't want to get used to this feeling. The main character raised his head and thought that if God really exists, then he should at least grant her peace after death. Carmine looked ahead. The lid of the coffin was put back in its place, after which the men took the coffin in their hands to carry it to the burial place. The boy said that the woman should rest in peace. The main character thought that although he himself could not be sure that he would wake up alive tomorrow, this was the place he had ended up in. The 7th Emperor, Edward VI, a wise ruler. The people loved him. He was his grandfather. The previous emperor had only one son, Carmine's father, the hereditary Prince Jean. The latter was at war with a neighboring country. Father took command on the front lines. He fought side by side with the imperial soldiers. However, if you are to believe the information received, Jean fell in battle from the enemy's sword. His teammates tried to bring him to his senses. On hearing this news, Edward VI was overcome with great grief. From deep sorrow and rage, he fell ill and died. The protagonist thought about what one of the nobles explained to him in this way. The latter bowed and, with a sly smile, said that this is how it was. This is the chronology of gifts. Although Carmine is still young, he has a great future ahead of him, because he will lead a huge empire. He can expect all-round support from them. The main character was sitting on the throne. He was somewhere in his thoughts. Then they called out to him, making it clear that they were reminding him of themselves. To which Carmine replied that when the time came, he would definitely turn to them. Then the aristocrat grinned terribly and said that he would wait for him. Carmine thought to himself that he would definitely not remember another aristocrat. Lately, the aristocracy had been pouring in to see him in droves. All this is the result of the Chancellor's propaganda at Norn's funeral. The impatient representatives of the Master of Ceremonies faction decided that it was time to start making themselves known. And then the aristocrats from the Chancellor's faction came to him and said that the Master of Ceremonies people were bad. And so it all repeats itself in a circle. The protagonist thought that due to the death of the crown prince, the emperor died of illness, and the emperor's throne became vacant despite the war. In the chaos, the most influential roles were taken by the Master of Ceremonies and the Chancellor. To make peace, they gave up territories that belonged to the empire. Carmine thought that everything was too simple. Maybe they were connected with the enemy, or something else. In any case, they worked together for some time, although you can't really call them allies. It just so happened that their goals coincided temporarily. They planned to put a person convenient for them in the emperor's place, so that he would sit as quiet as a mouse. The protagonist thought that he himself had become such a person for them. At that time, it was not yet known who the legal wife of the crown prince would give birth to, a boy or a girl. Carmine hasn't fully understood the laws of succession yet, but apparently a man takes precedence over a woman. And then he was born, a boy. So it was decided to kill the other heirs who were being prepared by the Chancellor and Master of Ceremonies. Carmine wondered if that was necessary. The other heirs were certainly the child of the crown prince, and the child carried by his mistress. The main character came to the conclusion that this was just some kind of bloodbath. This whole family had completely gone off the rails. If there are now 2 people in power, then why hasn't the situation in the country yet escalated into a civil war? Carmine reasoned that there were actually 2 reasons for this. The first was simply the difference in combat power. Chancellor Raoul's faction has almost half of the entire empire. In military and domestic terms, the territory is the most advanced. In case of war, the Master of Ceremonies has no chance. That is why the Chancellor currently has more power. And the second man has no choice but to allow him everything. Moreover, if the main character does die, then this man will most likely become the next emperor. This is provided for by the empire's law of succession, so Prime Minister Raoul cannot completely ignore it. People who were higher in line than Akakar were killed by the hands of the Prime Minister. But he simply won't be able to kill him. Otherwise, the Chancellor will be considered an ordinary rebel. The Maester of Ceremonies faction exists. The danger that there are traitors in the Chancellor's faction will never disappear. Carmine's death is not advantageous to the Prime Minister as long as Akikar lives. Why the Master of Ceremonies cannot kill the main character? He is his daughter's son, his grandson. If he kills Carmine, it means he's killing his own grandson. If it becomes public knowledge, it will be a complete disgrace to him. The hero says that despite the fact that he will become the first ruler after the inheritance, but despite the discontent over the fact that a man killed his grandson, the aristocrats will support such a man. The young man reflects on the need to find the perfect balance and maintain equilibrium. The hero declares that he will remain neutral as long as possible. The hero decides to remain a profitable puppet for both sides. Other characters, such as the Master of Ceremonies and the Minister, show interest in the hero, seeking to use him for their own purposes. The young man says it's important to continue to act like a child his age to avoid arousing suspicion, and thanks others for their valuable information. The butler states that no more meetings are planned today. The hero agrees to return to the room. The butler's name is Herc Ladif. He is tasked with taking care of the protagonist, and is supported by people from different factions, including ministers and masters of ceremonies. Some neutral nobles also trust him. Hark can be trusted, but he acts in the interests of the aristocracy and others, trying to please everyone. The young man says that Hark tells everyone what fruit he likes and dislikes. But once the master grows up, he will have to try very hard to earn his trust. He wonders how he can cope with the situation. The boy realizes that if he gives some gold to Herc, he will tell anyone about him. The hero notices that this man is greedy and is happy only when his pocket is full. A room with poor sound insulation is described, where everything can be heard inside, but not outside. The steward has the privilege of entering the waiting room without permission, while others need permission. And that's why he can eavesdrop at any moment, God. And that's why the young man pretends to be an incompetent person. The young man thinks that this is total control of life. Regent Alexia asks how he is feeling, to which the young man happily calls her mother. Hark demands prior permission to meet with the emperor, and Alexia argues with the man. The young man thinks and ridicules the man for not being paid. The woman demands that Hark leave because she has an important conversation with the emperor. The man agrees. The young man realizes that Regent Alexia is his mother in this world. He wonders why she began to sense something was wrong when he was used for political purposes, and believes that it is too late. The young man asks his mother what she wanted to talk about. The woman warns that Raoul is up to no good. He wonders who Raoul is, but understands that he is dangerous. The young man learns that Raoul is a minister who intends to seize power in the country. He says that he is a child and should not understand such serious things. Raoul forcibly married the protagonist's aunt to his son. The emperor learns that his father had a younger sister he did not know about before. He expresses surprise and a desire to know more. Alexia confirms that the hero really does have an aunt, who is his father's younger sister. One of the hero's younger sisters became a princess of another country, and the other was forced to marry Raoul's son. Alexia is sure that he wants to get rid of the young man, to which the young man thinks that the woman is telling too much information, because he is only a child. The woman says that Raoul wants the hero's aunt to become the new emperor. The hero wonders how his aunt can take the throne. Alexia explains that according to the imperial law, a hero must become emperor. The hero asks what the clan law is. The woman tries to explain further. The hero expresses irritation at his mother's behavior. He asks in surprise why she is leaving already. Alexia explains that it is time for her to leave, as delay may arouse the minister's suspicions. The young man says that his mother clearly feels that she wants to go to her lover, and adds that he himself is attached to his maids. He advises her to be a good mother, so that her son will love her. The emperor tells what he was able to find out about the ancient laws of the Lothar Empire, where an empire once existed. He learns that the Bundal clan once settled here, and later became aristocrats. The Lothar Empire collapsed and power passed into the hands of the Bungdalt family. The hero says that the country was renamed the Bungdalt Empire. The country, formerly the Lothar Empire, is now ruled by the Bungdale clan. The hero explains that two laws, the Lothar Succession Law and the Bungdale Succession Law, exist simultaneously. According to imperial law, the throne is inherited by the first male, as well as a girl. According to clan law, only a male can inherit the throne. It is also noted that a girl cannot become an emperor. He also says that it is difficult to collect all the information. The hero admits that he does not understand the principle by which the necessary law is chosen. Hark enters the room and asks permission to meet the hero. The emperor asks in surprise who it is. The butler says that the hero will know a man when he sees him, but does not name him. The hero confidently opens the door. A man in a long coat appears in the room. Raoul turns to the hero, thanking him for coming. The emperor thinks that this man is the last one who has not done anything today. The man asks the hero to listen to him, but the hero categorically refuses and says that he does not want to listen. The man is indignant, calling the situation a huge misunderstanding. The hero declares that he does not believe the man's story. He reminds Raoul that his mother has already explained everything. The man explains that the conflict arose because of the engagement of his useless son to Maria, the mistress's daughter. He also warns that the country could be taken over if Maria marries a foreigner. Raoul claims that he has realized the need to act for the good of the country and that the wedding will not take place until the hero takes the throne. The emperor adds that Maria is the younger sister of the crown prince and the hero's aunt. The hero suspects that the story about the old woman is an attempt to set him at odds with the minister. There's a big difference between an engagement and a wedding, and that a wedding can actually give power. The hero wonders why the man is deliberately trying to confuse him, or speaks in such a way, perhaps because he is a child. They are surprised how he knew about his aunt who was to take the throne. The young man notes that Raoul understood the situation too quickly. The hero expresses dissatisfaction, calling the man greedy. Hark overheard the conversation with the old woman. He adds that the neutral person was on the minister's side. The hero explains that Raoul was let in without his permission. Carmine notes that if the mother keeps coming, even when her help is not needed, the emperor discusses how he can do without the help of a butler. The hero states that he doubts that Hark can live without the huge amount of bribes. He expresses dissatisfaction, saying that it is all thanks to him. The emperor adds that the butler is completely focused on selling information. He mentions that Hark asked his mother to stop contacting him. He thinks he is brave for making such a request. The old man warns the hero that his mother wants to use him. He says that as soon as she has a child from her lover, she will forget about him. He feels he must give some kind of reaction, although it seems strange to him. Carmine admits that his mother says she loves him. The old man wonders if the hero's mother is currently enjoying a date with her lover. The hero expresses irritation and says that he would like to hit the old man for the way he talks about his mother. He wonders how anyone can say such things to a child. The emperor replies that he believes him. Raoul apologizes to the hero for wasting his time today. Carmine asks the old man if he is on his side. Raoul confidently declares that he will always help the hero. The old man confidently declares that he will always be on the hero's side. The emperor looks worried and thinks that the situation here is really bad. He says that his mother never came to see him again. Carmine must have been criticized by both factions. He thinks something happened. Carmine asks Hark about the reason for what is happening. Hark says he wants to call someone inside and offers to introduce them. The emperor agrees. The man asks the ladies to come in. The two maids introduce themselves as Kara Knightley and Alicia Iselman, stating that they will be taking care of the hero on behalf of the regent. The girls are happy to meet them, but the young man, with a little irony, notes the complexities of politics. The hero notes that 5 years have passed since his rebirth. Carmine says that in recent days he has been busy meeting aristocrats. Most of them have introduced him to their daughters who are about their own age. He wonders if he will have a choice among potential brides. The hero notices that girls don't seem to like him very much. The girl hides behind the aristocrat's back from the hero. The emperor calms her down, saying that there is nothing terrible about it. The hero introduces himself as Carmine Fat. He admits that he doesn't exercise and barely moves, and explains that he eats fatty foods every day, which is why he has gained weight. People test his food for poison, and the long test makes the food cold and tasteless. The hero notices that the adults around him are vigilant, and he can use this to his advantage. Carmine realizes that he will have to give up his harem wife in another world, but states that he does not regret the decision. He confirms that most of the aristocrats the hero has met were men. The hero concludes that there is a clear male superiority in this world. Carmine notes that several aristocratic women did come to him and were excellent magicians. He explains that most wizards in this world are aristocrats. He points out that this makes sense, given how aristocracies came to be. The first aristocrats were those who distinguished themselves in battle. Carmine explains that in this world, mastering magic meant being able to fight. Mages were also among the most powerful soldiers in the army. As a result, almost all magi became aristocrats, and their descendants retained this status. Magical talent is hereditary. He says that the idea of male superiority may not exist, but instead there is the superiority of magic. He adds that he was planning to hide his ability to use magic. Carmine notes that if society has a perception that one cannot be called an aristocrat without using magic, then this can be used against the hero. The hero says that we need to carefully test the waters. Carmine also mentions that he hears both grandfathers rambling. He complains that he has to pretend to be an obedient child and eat cold food every day. The hero states that he has learned to better control heat. He also notes that he has mastered the use of telekinesis well and has improved his telekinesis skills. He also created a new spell, Invisible Barrier, which resembles a small shield. The hero doesn't know how strong his shield is, since there's no way to test it. However, he's glad he has a means of defense. He can also use healing magic. The hero admits that he can only heal small scratches and cuts for now. However, the fact that he has such an ability already makes him happy. He is confident in his intentions and wants to focus on developing magic that can help him escape. Carmine says that magic did not exist in his past life, and he enjoys learning new things. He adds that he recently learned another useful spell. The maid asks the hero if he needs anything. The maid is surprised to see Carmine offering a hug. The hero decisively says sleep and hugs her. Carmine uses a forced sleep spell. However, he admits that the maids already sleep a lot. He notes that if he puts the maids to sleep with magic, he will be more certain that they will not wake up. The hero ponders how to collect moisture from the air and create a barrier. He understands that magic in this world is activated only when it can be imagined. He also notes that without complete knowledge, nothing will work. Carmine admits that his ability to control water is not yet effective enough, but is glad that at least he can do something with magic. The Emperor says that he cannot even imagine how invisibility and spatial manipulation magic works. The young man realizes that in this world there are laws and restrictions that he does not yet know about. The hero thinks that he will enjoy studying magic after escaping. There are still many obstacles to overcome. He believes that he has a chance of success. Carmine says to stop thinking about the future and start practicing. The hero discusses the three main types of magic he studies: defense, healing, and stealth. Carmine notes that it would be nice to add another type of magic detection. The hero reasons that in case of escape, he needs detection magic in order to see through walls. The young man decides to start by trying to create something like an ultrasonic wave. The room is warded against magic, but Harem has a way around it. The hero actively uses the spell, calling it summoning. Carmine explains that the trick works by absorbing heat from surrounding light sources. He adds that more heat can be absorbed from areas with higher temperatures. He also says that he was able to create a boon thanks to his heat manipulation magic. The hero notices the differences in temperature and realizes that almost no heat is taken from places with low temperatures. Carmine states that the local magic barrier does not hinder him, as heat is not a magical force. He is confident that he can pass through the barriers if he continues to influence the magical force gradually. The hero explains that this way he can detect other heat sources. Then all he has to do is imagine what is there. The young man decides to project onto the retina. He notes that although the task seems difficult, he does not see any particular problems in it. The hero notes that his long training has proven useful. The Emperor declares decisively that he can now move on. The hero explains how he uses heat magic to detect heat sources. He says that he can localize these sources with the power of his mind. By projecting an image directly onto his eyes, he thus sees through heat magic. The hero says that if he can sense heat sources behind the wall, he will be able to see through walls, since he's always failed miserably before. Carmine reminds himself to focus. He's confident he can handle it today. The hero clearly sees two guards at the door and rejoices at his success. Carmine realizes that his heat magic has become heat detection magic. He now has the four necessary types of magic: defense, healing, stealth, and detection. The young man sees a stranger on the roof. The hero looks worried and thoughtful. Carmine suddenly screams, claiming that someone is there. He expresses surprise and asks who it could be. He notices that there is no second floor on this floor. The hero concludes that the person is sitting under the roof of the building. He assumes that it could be a murderer or a guard, but he is not sure. The hero continues to think about who is there. He thinks that it could be either a killer or just an observer. Carmine realizes that someone might have seen him practicing magic daily in this room. He thinks that today the hero talked a lot and perhaps conveyed information that he was doing magic in this room. The hero notices that no one except him used magic in this room. If it's impossible to use magic in this room at all, Carmine begins to think that he might have a special talent. He also worries that he might be considered special. The hero assumes that the enemy may try to attack first, fearing that his abilities may be unique. The young man says he will definitely not be able to sleep due to anxiety and stress. Carmine notices that the man is again in the same place where he was the day before. He also admits that he does not know who his master is or what his goals are. The hero notes that it is impossible to ignore the fact that this person wants to kill him. Carmine says that severe stress, fear, and insomnia have a major impact on his health and appearance. The hero says that he felt sick and lost consciousness. 3 weeks have passed since he discovered the observer. The hero declares that everything is under control. They note that so much time has passed since the hero lost consciousness. Other characters, including the nurse and the old man, say that everything is fine now. The hero expresses irritation, stating that the adults are interfering with his life and demands that they leave. The nurse and other adults meekly agree. He also says that many feared that someone was trying to poison him. Carmine admits that he was visited by various adults every day. The hero wonders about the real reason why he lost consciousness. Carmine notices that today the man is again in the same place at the top. The young man reasons that there are probably several observers there who change every day. He comes to the conclusion that this means that he is being watched 24/7. The hero assumes that this man is most likely not the killer, since a more experienced magician would have been sent to kill him. The 2 old men probably don't know about the hero's ability to use magic. He also admits that he does not understand what the observers do every day. The hero expresses irritation, realizing that he is constantly under surveillance. Carmine explains that poisoning was officially reported, so the amount of food and portion sizes were reduced. He adds that excess weight is unhealthy. He thinks that perhaps because he has lost weight, the daughters of aristocrats now look at him as a predator. The hero admits that he feels uneasy because of the aura of the girls around him. He introduces his friend, Nadine de Varn, daughter of the Duke of Varn, the prickly duchess. Carmine says she is the only one who still looks at him with disdain. The hero asks in surprise why she came to tell him this. The young man finds it amusing to tease the girl. Father reminds Nadine that she cannot speak to His Majesty like that. The man asks the hero for forgiveness, stating that his child is not the most obedient. Carmine remembers that he is from the neutral nobles. The man thanks the hero. The hero tells that the man once held the position of an imperial general, but was stripped of his rank after the death of his father, which occurred shortly before the hero was born. Adds that until he escapes, he remains a neutral noble. Carmine emphasizes that the man was a former imperial general. The hero admits that he knows very little about the local military. Carmine remarks that a scar on such a beautiful face must be popular. He expresses admiration, saying that the man's daughter loves him very much. The youth points out that another man is an important figure among the neutral nobles. The hero introduces the Count and Minister of Finance Geoffrey de Nimble. He looks older than his age and is already going bald. It is also noted that the economic situation of the empire is getting worse every year. Carmine adds that money plays a key role in all aspects of their world, including politics. The hero explains that if the person responsible for finances joins one of the sides, the balance of power will change significantly. The hero says that both old men are clearly putting a lot of pressure on the Minister of Finance, trying to influence his decisions. The Emperor says that while he is a child, he cannot help Count Nimbelu. The young man notices that another person has recently attracted his attention. The hero tells of the Count Palatine Alfred the Vaudet, who declared that he would side with the one who would place the crown on the head of the emperor. Carmine notes that he hasn't revealed much about himself. He suggests that this man may be the master of the Watchers. The hero explains why he wants to personally get closer to Count Palatine Alfred the Vaudet to learn more. Carmine claims he knew his interlocutor didn't have a job. Pauls replies that he has work. The hero is surprised that he just left. Carmine notes that he didn't expect this from a hero from intelligence and that he doesn't see his intentions. He also says that it will be difficult to expose the hero. The man admits that he will have to wait for now. The hero says that the next day he was brought to the reception room for the first time. The hero had never been in this room before. The hero notices that the guest room looks more luxurious than the room that was usually used. Carmine asks why he has a meeting with people from the Velf Kingdom today. He is surprised, as he usually only meets with aristocrats. The young man wonders if he might soon enter society. The hero notices that he has only seen old people lately, and hopes that there will be something interesting at this meeting. The emperor asks who will come to the meeting. The man turns to Carmine and mentions the first princess of the Velfi kingdom. The girl introduces herself as Lady Rosalia van Charonia Creveir. Carmine adds that in 5 years of stormy life in the palace, he saw the same thing, but this was the first time. He thinks that she is a person who combines beauty and pure innocence, to which she says that she is glad to meet the hero. The hero expresses surprise, feeling tense due to the presence of such a small and cute girl. The youth also asks where the kingdom of Velvi is. He wonders what kind of relationship they have with the kingdom of Velvi, and admits that he knows nothing about it. Carmine suggests that this may be another political trick by one of the nobles. The hero asks in surprise why the first princess of the kingdom of Velvi was brought. After all, he has a reputation as the emperor in the power of the nobility, which means it will be bad. He suggests that the meeting may be related to the resolution of diplomatic issues or engagements. Carmine says we need to wait and see what happens next. The hero introduces himself, saying that his name is Carmine de la Garde Bongar, and he says that he likes the princess. He invites her to become his companion. The princess is embarrassed by the proposal. Hark notes that marriage is impossible for a hero at his age. The hero asks to do something similar. The princess asks about the engagement, and Carmine replies that it is a good idea. Carmine asks the man if it's really that hard to do. Hark hesitantly replies that it's possible. The man orders that everything be quickly arranged according to the hero's instructions, emphasizing that nothing is preventing this. The hero notes that both factions did not expect his decision, which causes surprise. Carmine asks the girl if she knows where Velvi's kingdom is. She expresses pleasure in telling everything. Carmine notices that the girl never spoke of the kingdom as her home. The hero notes that she did not treat the kingdom as her homeland. The hero notices that this is the flagship of the fleet of the kingdom of Burba Medelia. He introduces himself as the captain of the royal guard of the kingdom of Burby Jordis, Adelson. The hero congratulates the girl on her birthday, despite the fact that they are far from home. The girl admits that she left her country at the age of 7 and was not even able to celebrate her birthday. She met him on the open sea. The hero says that although there are few of them, the entire delegation will make sure that she has a good birthday. Jordis asks the girl to take a comfortable seat as they are almost finished preparing. She thanks him for his concern. The princess says that the sea breeze helps her clear her mind. Jordis offers to call him if she needs anything. She was sailing on a ship from her homeland. The map shows the location of the kingdom of Burb in the northwest of the continent, known as the Eastern Continent. He explains that the kingdom of Burby prospered as part of the Lothar Empire. The hero notes that the Burbys were never proud of their position. He explains that they have accepted their situation for the sake of peace. However, the hero warns that such a world will sooner or later collapse. The kingdom of Burb in 460 CE. The hero expresses irritation and says that another village was plundered as a result of Thomas Asanaki's attack. The king of the kingdom of Burb, Alexius van Chalongier Clovilo, looks worried and surprised. He also mentions that this refers to the Eastern Continent, where the kingdom of Burby and the Bungdil Empire are located. The hero explains that the religion practiced in many countries on this continent is called the Holy Church. He says that Tamisasinaki is one of the sects of the Holy Church, consisting of fanatics ready to shed blood. After Ain's death, this sect quickly gained power and weapons, almost instantly. The hero says that the center of this sect's teaching was the revival of Ain, indicates that the Promised Land is located near the capital of Clea, in the territory of the Kingdom of Burbe. This led to a confrontation between them and the Kingdom of Burby. The hero explains that the Tamisasinaki have allied themselves with other sects of the same faith who also believe in a Promised Land. The hero explains that by uniting, they created the Legacy faction, which became a force to be reckoned with. There are many sects in the Holy Church, and it turned out that the shaking sects were prevalent in the regions where people landed from the ship. The hero quotes a scripture that says that as a ruler, he ordered the shackles of people who do not accept the teachings of Saintine. The hero mentions the historical fact that these lands were already inhabited by humans before On arrived. He also says that On tried to subjugate them when he landed on the continent. It all happened because they needed the technology of the people from this continent. The technology of the old continent was significantly behind that of the Eastern Continent. Among the Aina colonists, there were masters who could master this technology. The hero explains that modern historians believe that the reason for the growth of the Holy Church was that the master craftsmen were adherents of the teaching. Other historians cite the conflict as the reason for the growth of the church. They mention that on the Western continent, the teaching was considered heresy and many people fled there. A resident of the kingdom of Burb says that they called their land the Promised Land in the scriptures. He notes that a man from another kingdom thinks so too. In fact, the kingdom was built by those who were driven out of these lands by the Ainu. The hero notes that the modern kingdom of Burb has nothing in common with its ancestors. The hero reminds us of the importance of supporting Western teachings. The politician of the kingdom of Burby agrees, adding that the kingdom of Burby does not intend to remain as it is now. Because of all this, the empire fell apart in the heritage fashion too. The hero says that the country has resigned itself to the status of a vassal state in order to avoid wars. He mentions that the battles between the sides were one-sided. For pagan believers who have not yet learned the true faith, their actions are considered a punishment. The hero explains that heretics are fallen people, enchanted by the devil. The hero describes how religious fanatics called their campaign against the pagans a holy war and attacked every village and city. The hero says that they burned and plundered villages, destroying everything in their path. He also mentions that Thomas Ashinaka, who used to be a minority, created his own nation and named it after himself. He notes that Thomas Ashinaka's military power greatly exceeds that of the Burbe kingdom. Another character says that now they have even less supplies for the people. The hero adds that this will be the last winter, and they can do nothing. Another character suggests taking someone from the imperial family into the royal family. The hero states that the Bungdil Empire remained neutral 100 years ago. Another character suggests asking the empire directly for help. One character thinks their idea is too far from reality. The princess notices that everyone is shouting, but no one can think of anything. The king expresses concern, saying that time is running out. He says that they don't care what anyone thinks of them. The hero firmly declares that they will ask for help from all the rulers in turn until they find an ally. The father makes a request to his daughter, calling her Rosaria. The heroine invites him to rely on her. The heroine turns thoughtfully to her father. Rosaria expresses confidence that despite the fact that the Holy War has been going on for 200 years, the kingdom of Burb will survive. She also states that she will definitely return home with success. The imperial capital of Cardinal is shown in the background of the city. Jordas notices that the place is indeed more beautiful than he expected. The heroine says that they had high hopes of meeting with the imperial capital of Cardinal, but they were never able to meet with the most authoritative dukes of the empire. Their desperate appeals to aristocrats from various factions were simply rejected. The heroine suggests going to the next country, the kingdom of Hismafi, where the road can help them. Jordas wonders if the kingdom of Hismafe has the strength to help, given that it is at war with the neighboring Tiva Empire. Rosaria asks if she can meet the emperor before leaving the country. The girl is surprised, considering it impossible due to the difference in their status. Jordas reminds them that they are both royalty and must have an audience. The hero notes that even if they cannot get help, they will receive important information about the young emperor. He also mentions that from a diplomatic point of view, it is better to have a higher position. The man adds that it is important to have more information for future negotiations. Rosaria states that the decision has been made and their fate depends on this meeting. She says that all this will be in the hands of the emperor. The man says that he is meeting the heroes for the first time and introduces himself as Helk the Diff. Jordas is surprised to learn that she is the only one who will be granted an audience. The male hero adds that he is a royal guard. Rosaria confirms that everything is fine. The group realizes that they cannot ask the emperor for more time, as they are already taking up his precious time. The heroine asks to see Roth. The man thanks the heroes for their understanding. Rosaria says she has been granted an audience, but she is unsure how this will affect her position. She also notes that Helk Ledif is a guard dog. She feels selfish for this. The heroine admits that she still tries to use a boy who is younger than her, even for the sake of saving her country. Rosaria is aware that those around her view her as petty and despicable. However, she's determined to continue to act, regardless of what others think. She asks herself to pull herself together. The heroine replies that she doesn't care what others say, and she will still act for the sake of her father and the kingdom of Burby. A young man stands in the room expressing seriousness and concentration. The hero introduces the girl as Rosaria van Sharinge Clowier, the first princess of the kingdom of Burby. She is delighted to meet the princess and says that her name is Carmine de la Garde, Bungert. Rosaria notices that his eyes are the same as a child's, but notes that they are more like the eyes of an experienced man or a wise elder. The hero expresses admiration and says that he likes his new acquaintance. This came as a surprise to Rosaria, as she had not expected such a development. The hero notices that the minister and the master of ceremonies were simply waiting for the kingdom of Burb to leave their countries on its own, realizing that no one would help them. They explained that it would be unwise to spend money and resources on a country that is on the verge of extinction. Neither the minister nor the master of ceremonies have responded to the problems of the kingdom of Burby until now. The hero notes that it was important to them, especially after the arrival of the puppet emperor, when the engagement proposal was made. The emperor has a wish, and whoever fulfills his wish can become the one who will truly stand in power. The two elders agree that in this way they will be able to become the ones who will actually control the government. The hero explains that they will have to act to get ahead of each other, even if they do not particularly want to help. The two elders declare that they take the emperor's wishes seriously. A group of people begin to discuss the issue of the kingdom of Burb and the engagement of the emperor. The hero says that representatives of their country visited other countries asking for support. Rosalia suggests that the reason for helping the kingdom of Burby could be because of the engagement. It is also mentioned that several countries agreed to provide support. When the royal fleet returned to the kingdom of Burby, the season had already changed. The heroine notes that the situation in the Cardinal Kingdom has changed significantly by the time they return. She reports the result of the mission to her interlocutor. The father praises the heroine for her efforts. The older man says that he did not expect the emperor to agree to help so easily. The heroine notes that thanks to the support, people were able to reclaim the previously lost cities of the kingdom of Burb and survive the harsh winter. She asks her father why he is not happy that the kingdom was saved by the efforts of everyone. The older man agrees that the kingdom is indeed saved, but adds that he has mixed feelings about it. He notices that people are talking about how the princess first met the emperor. The man expresses his dislike for these rumors. The king says that if their kingdom didn't have so many problems, the situation would be different. He also mentions that he heard that the current emperor is a stupid puppet. The man admits that as a king and as a father, he worries about the future of the kingdom. He says that the heroine did not need to agree to the engagement. The king notes that although they are about the same age, he is 2 years younger than her. She also wonders why he is called a stupid puppet. Rosalia claims that everything they say about him is not true. She notices mysterious eyes that hide many secrets. The heroine is surprised how one can believe that he is younger than her. Rosalia is confident that he will be able to rule the country, and perhaps the whole world. She claims that her father is wrong and is confident that His Highness Carmine will become a great man, and she will be the one who will always support him. The father suggests that the heroine change her mind about the engagement. She replies that she cannot break this promise as it could seriously damage their authority. The heroine says that as the princess of the kingdom, she must fulfill her duties. The king notices that the heroine cares about the kingdom. Rosalia asks him to stop crying. Queen Burby. Johanna Westbury meets his daughter Rosaria. The queen notices that Rosaria has grown since they last saw each other. She asks Rosaria about the engagement. Will she tell her anything about it? Rosaria expresses surprise when she hears her mother's question about the engagement. The queen jokingly says that Rosaria is trying too hard to act grown up, and asks her to tell her about love. The heroine states that she is doing her duty by taking care of the kingdom. The mother says that she now understands the situation. Rosalia replies that her father is waiting for her mother at his place. Thanks to her parents' help, her kingdom was saved, and she thanks her parents for that. The heroine mentions that she will help them as a princess and wife. She gives her highness some parting words, telling him to take care of himself, and adding that they will meet again soon. The hero introduces himself as Balthazar Sibyar, a member of the royal guard. He notes that in this country, where ordinary puppets rule, the duty of a guard has become a mere show. The hero wonders where to get honor and pride if they have become just a formality. Balthazar says that for the sake of a man who can lead the country to greatness, one can even give one's life. The hero expresses his readiness to defend the son of his empire at the cost of his own life. He expresses the idea that he thought it was the greatest honor. Another character confirms that this is what is being referred to, pointing to his position as Balthazar's imperial guard. Sibyara. The hero notes that they are ordinary people and do not see much difference between themselves and others. He says she has explained the situation many times, but it is difficult for ordinary soldiers to understand. He also adds that the new branch of the military is a master of military affairs. Balthasar mentions a story of the sixth Emperor Edward III, who granted this position. The hero says that now everything can be bought for money, if you pay well. Another man also recalls that this policy was abolished during the reign of Edward IV. He explains that although the emperor managed to abolish this practice, they were unable to return everything back to the way it was before. Another character adds that even now, appointments to the guard remain under the control of Chancellor Raoul. Balthazar says that this policy has not gone away. The hero asks the other character to shut up. The hero complains that because of bureaucrats, the guard has turned into a toy for aristocrats. However, the hero replies that such people are not capable of protecting the ruling family. Another character jokes, offering Balthazar to buy a place in the guard. The hero says that his father died in battle, although he himself comes from a simple family that served the local viscount as gunsmiths for several generations. Balthazar mentions that when he was 15 years old, he became the squire of the chief general. The hero explains that he desperately tried to overcome his father, and his efforts were noticed by the general. The general was an imperial knight, so the hero often helped to maintain order in the city. So Balthazar became a guardsman. Balthazar claims that some members of the guard simply bought their positions, and they can be useful in combat, unlike him, who has combat experience. He reflects on how a true guard must be loyal and ready to protect the ruling family. The young man suggests that Balthazar considers serving in the city guard if he is unhappy with his current situation. The young man reminds him that he took an oath of knighthood. He notes that politics plays a role, and the young man did indeed go through a rigorous process in taking the oath of office before the prime minister. He explains that the title of imperial knight used to be something that could be bought by aristocrats. The hero admits that he doesn't understand how knights are different from other people. He, confirming that the titles of guardsman and knight are official positions, independent of social status. Balthazar declares that he is both a guardsman and a knight. Before, his comrades laughed at him. He firmly declares that he cannot return to his former life in the city guard. The hero says that in the guard he will have to compete with the sons of rich aristocrats. A waitress from the Goose Tavern named Ina interrupts the conversation, reminding the heroes that such arguments will not lead to anything good. Ina warns the heroes against discussing politics, pointing out that even ordinary people know about the conspiracies against the emperor and the young prince. Balthazar talks about his acquaintance with some aristocrats and admits that he understands what is being discussed. He mentions rumors that the emperor and his son were allegedly killed by aristocrats. The man notes that everyone in the empire knows about these events. Knowing the nobles of the imperial capital, he is not surprised if these rumors are true. However, he wonders how such rumors could spread among everyone. The girl asks the hero if he will participate in the upcoming parade. The girl shares information that the new emperor is a baby. She hopes that he will look like the late emperor. He also mentions that his age is only 5 years old. Balthazar states that the emperor is still too young and is most likely a puppet in the hands of the aristocrats. Another character says that the guards met with the emperor himself. A group of people laugh at the situation, calling the Grand Imperial Guard blockheads, who are only fit for this kind of job. Balthazar firmly declares that he is ready to carry out any order for the glory of the Imperial Guards. The hero goes outside, thinking that what is happening is not worth it. The hero reflects on a new life, which may be ordinary. He continues to argue that if a person does not have any special talents, then he can be content with a simple life. Born into a loving family, graduated from school and found a job. The hero admits that he did not have a special dream or goal in life. He also notes that he had previously seen no reason to continue to exist. The hero recalls how he met the end of his previous life with exactly these thoughts. Carmine wakes up from a nightmare, expressing hatred for his past state. He reflects on how he was reborn as a little boy who became an emperor. He feels that even at Norn's funeral he had to attend. He notices that today everything is different. Carmine explains that today is the celebration of the founding of the empire, which takes place every 50 years. He recalls that the story began 150 years ago. The cardinal and the first emperor received territory near the capital from the fallen state of Lothar. The emperor sent messengers to all corners of the country to spread this information. The people, who wanted a peaceful life, joyfully received the news of the restoration of the empire. 50 years after the restoration of the empire, the great Emperor Edward IV held a grand celebration. However, on this day, Peasants are usually required to bow to passing nobles. People joyfully greet the imperial family. Carmine says that today there will be a parade, which will take place 150 years after the founding of the empire. The hero notes that this is a great opportunity to go outside the palace. He also understands that this will increase his chances of leaving the palace. The hero learns that the parade will begin immediately after the ceremony. The maid explains that before the parade there will be a ceremony in the church, where the imperial family will pray for the prosperity of the empire. Carmine admits that he is a little scared to show himself in front of such a crowd of people. The hero notices that the emperor's carriage is standing in front of them and is surprised by this fact. Another character confirms that this is indeed the emperor's carriage, adding that such carriages cannot be penetrated by either magic or bullets due to their robust protection. Balthazar expresses doubt and says that if a serious threat appears, they can use people as human shields. One of the characters wonders why the hero is counting crows today. The hero asks what brought him here, turning to the commander. A group of soldiers notice the appearance of the royal guard and are surprised by their presence, wondering about the purpose of their arrival. Two senior officers discuss the ongoing conflicts between the imperial and royal guards. One of the soldiers expresses the opinion that the royal guards are a new unit made up of the regent's supporters and considers them less experienced than the imperial guards. Balthazar thinks that the royal guards may not be up to the task of protecting the parade. A junior soldier asks the commander if the guards will be protecting the parade. The commander categorically states that responsibility for the safety of the imperial carriage lies entirely with them. The hero says that he is glad that they will be the ones guarding him. He expresses doubt, not knowing what to expect from the child. The man also announces that he will be observing everyone and giving them individual feedback on their performance. The commander reminds everyone that today is an important day, and they must do their best to successfully complete their duties. Balthazar muses that the child may be just a pawn in a political game. Carmine wonders why one must now greet nobles loudly and without bowing, instead of the usual practice of bowing to them. But now, the hero understands that he lives much better than other citizens of the empire. Carmine reflects on how the country is constantly experiencing political disputes between aristocrats, and ordinary people have a very hard time. The only one who can fix the situation is he, the emperor. The hero admits that he is just a child with a crown. People will have every right to hate him. Carmine says that if he doesn't change anything, there could be riots. The hero feels fear and despair, covering himself with his hands from the visible nightmare. He asks not to show him this, and not to hear about it anymore. Carmine reflects on his pitiful state, feeling weak and unable to cope with the situation, especially after being reborn as an emperor and now having to accept his responsibilities. He admits to himself that he is truly pathetic. The residents notice the imperial carriage and joyfully shout the hero's name and rank. The hero is glad that the residents greeted him with kindness. Carmine asks why the people look so happy. The officer is puzzled by this question. The officer reminds the emperor that the previous ruler and the crown prince were very popular among the people. The emperor asks the name of the officer who has just addressed him. The officer replies that his name is Shubarov, Rugus, but the hero admits that he has no strength or talent. Carmine still wants to be special. He lacks the courage to take a step forward. The emperor reflects on his previous life where he was not special in any way. He adds that it is normal not to want to die. He also expresses a desire to live naturally, without special privileges or responsibilities. The hero feels the gaze of those around him and notices their faces. Carmine is adamant that he doesn't want to be just a puppet. The hero realizes that time passes unnoticed after he is reborn. A city on the brink of collapse. Greedy aristocrats who know no bounds. Carmine recalls that from childhood he had to defend his life, emphasizing the difficult conditions in which he grew up. While the aristocracy continues to enjoy luxury, the common people are becoming poorer every day. The hero thought that people would shift all their anger onto him, but he notices that reality turned out to be different than he expected. People greet him with smiles and hope in their eyes, despite the fact that he is a puppet of the nobles. This touched him deeply, and he decided to become an emperor. He would be a great ruler. The hero explains that in order to achieve his goal, he needs to get rid of those who have seized power into their own hands. He mentions the chancellor, the master of ceremonies, and the regent. The young man thinks that he needs to get rid of them. Carmine also admits that if he fails, he will die instantly. He warns that if either of them starts a conflict, it could split the country. The hero realizes that immediate action is now useless. He decides to wait for the right moment. Carmine thinks that he will quarrel the factions of the Chancellor and the Regent, and he will rise above them. Carmine asks Hark when the guests will arrive. Hark expresses irritation when he hears a knock on the door. Carmine notices that the guest is different from the others. Count Voded arrives and asks why he was summoned. The hero is happy to greet the Count and declares that he is ready to work again. He mentions that this man is the head of a spy organization. Carmine notes that with a man on his side, he can get much more reliable information than by eavesdropping on the conversations of maids and soldiers. However, now it is extremely important for him to lure this man to his side. The hero admits that when they first met, he did not understand the seriousness of the situation. Every time the hero met the Count would grab him by the hand and send him off to do small errands. Carmine says that their relationship initially looked like that of a selfish emperor and a count who was bored with a child. The Count reminds the hero that he also has his own affairs to attend to. The hero declares that if they are left alone with the Count, no one will suspect anything suspicious. The Emperor thanks his interlocutor for a normal dialogue, noting that this is the first such conversation between them. He also expresses gratitude for repeated assistance. The hero wonders if his people are under the ceiling. Another character notices that the hero has noticed their presence. However, the hero calms the situation by stating that everything is fine and they can stay where they are. The interlocutor confirms that these are the men he appointed to guard the Emperor. Carmine mentions that he doesn't care who these men are, Garms or traitors. Both admit that they are unworthy of trust. The hero asks how the former member of the neutral party views the overall situation. He says that he heard that the Count follows the will of the crown, but asks if this is true. Carmine asks if the other person will actually carry out the crown's order to kill him. The other person confirms the truth, but adds that it depends on the situation. The Count recalls that he had previously stated his intention to follow the will of the crown. However, he expresses doubts and uncertainty that he will continue to do this forever. The hero admits that he cannot answer the question about future obedience to the crown, since the situation may change tomorrow. Carmine notices that the Count is being secretive and not revealing all the information at once, calling him a real scoundrel. The hero reflects that the interlocutor shows only what he wants. This is due to the desire to find out how much he knows. Carmine wonders why the other person chooses to ignore him. He understands that the interlocutor is now aware of this. The hero notes that he has a trump card, the ability to use magic indoors. The Count replies that he does not ignore. He emphasizes that he always follows orders, but the situation requires a more direct answer. The young man asks if he is doing all this because he is the Emperor. The interlocutor had previously said that everything depended on the situation, which indicated his independence and calculating approach. Carmine concluded that for the interlocutor, the Emperor was not an authority to be obeyed without question. He emphasizes that the interlocutor is Lothar's legitimate heir. The Count mentions that his family, the Wooded, has protected Lothar for centuries. The hero notes that the Lothar Empire was a great power, on whose ruins the Bungdale Empire arose. Carmine wonders if House Woad was close to the Lothar imperial family. The hero notices with surprise that the modern country has a completely different name than Lothar. However, he considers all this to be empty words and does not believe in their significance. The Count states that the truth is that the Bungdal Empire is the rightful successor of Lothar. Carmine admits that from the very beginning he understood that the hero was interested in the theme of Lothar's successor. The hero declares that this man is loyal not to the Empire or the imperial family, but only to Lothar's successor. Carmine realizes that the situation is simpler than he expected. He also notes that since he is Lothar's successor, he does not need to tell anyone about his ability to use magic. The hero asks if Duke Raoul and Duke Akikar are also Lothar's successors. The interlocutor answers negatively, saying that Raoul and Akikar are only dukes and have nothing to do with the title of successor of Lothar. The hero confirms that he is the only successor of Lothar. Carmine wonders if it is possible that he will no longer be considered Lothar's successor. The interlocutor reassures the hero, stating that as long as he remembers his roots, such problems will not become a threat to him. Carmine ponders how to gain more information about his status as Lothar's successor. The hero realizes that the only problem would be if he tried to change Lothar's culture or history. The young man understands that his role may be temporary, as his importance will diminish after the birth of his heirs. However, he resolutely declares that he wants to live as an emperor, preparing for the worst. The hero admits that he wants to trust his interlocutor, but it is impossible to do so without guarantees. He also notes that he has unresolved questions. Carmine wonders why his father and the previous emperor were killed. He notes that among his subordinates and family, he's the oldest. The Count replies that they ended their lives voluntarily. He asks if this has anything to do with the actions of the hero or other participants. Carmine reminds him that the church does not approve of leaving. The Count states that his family values protecting Lothar over the holy teachings. Carmine also notes that the belief in the Lothar Empire is more akin to fanaticism than true faith. The hero states that he was prepared for the difficulties and hardships that lay ahead of him as emperor. Carmine agrees with his interlocutor's proposal and clarifies that it is not necessary to wait for the coronation in order to ask for help. The hero announces a plan of action. They will take the country back from the robbers and turn it into a great power worthy of the title of empire. The interlocutor complies, declaring that he will do everything for the sake of the empire. Carmine notices that he now has an assistant, or rather an ally. The hero asks a question about how the interlocutor would act if the hero died during childbirth or was not born at all. The Count replies that he would kill Duke Raoul and Duke Akakara, and then take his own life. Carmine thinks that the Count himself is completely sick in the head. The hero says that he has decided to become an emperor, and has therefore already acquired his first accomplice, Count Voted. The question remains what to do next. He thinks about what policy he will follow. The boy thinks that this needs to be decided immediately, because he is also a person with his own desires and, he would even say, ambitions. He wants to be known in the future as a great ruler, and for future generations he should be remembered as an important historical figure, not a tyrant or a puppet. Carmine ponders what a wise ruler of the empire, a wise ruler of this country, should look like. If he continues to sing the praises of pacifism and closes his eyes to the interests of the country, he may become famous as a great ruler, but only from the point of view of other countries. He will choose fun over wars and people will starve. The hero is the ruler of an empire, so the well-being of his people must be his priority, no matter how many countries he has to destroy for it. Carmine knows the history of his original world. Even though history in this world is completely different, the experience from that world can serve as a guide for him. He recalls Alexander the Great, who was able to build a great empire in one generation, but after his death, it fell apart. The boy thinks about it. He is not satisfied with such short-lived prosperity. Although he understands that in comparison with such a great figure, he is just an ant. Carmine thinks that, whatever the case, he will soon be 6 years old. In the palace, they constantly talk about imperial education. He remembers that the previous emperor began his education at the same age. He was 4 years old. The boy understands that, in comparison to him, he already feels that he is lagging behind, although it is logical that the aristocrats do not want to teach their puppet some sense. With the hype surrounding the engagement, they decided they couldn't leave him without an education any longer. They put all their energy into negotiating humanitarian aid. However, the neutral aristocrats began to resent his lack of education. The hero understands that this is a good chance to attract the neutral faction to his side. The Regent faction has declared that the Regent will take care of the education of the Emperor. However, the Chancellor insists that he himself take care of the education of the Emperor. The boy thinks that these two, as always, are fighting for any advantage. All he can do is take countermeasures. He understands that it doesn't matter whether the Chancellor or the Regent takes up education. Both sides will teach only what is convenient for them and, if necessary, will distort the facts. The hero must get a good education if he wants to rule the country. In his past life, he did not study anything related to the structure of the empire, so even one good teacher is already a worthy victory. Herc has been assigned to him as a history teacher. The man confirms that everything is as he said. Count Voted is the head of the spy network. Since the hero teamed up with him, he has had access to more accurate information. The boy believes that he himself understands how useful he is. Whenever the opportunity arises, Carmine plays the selfish emperor, throwing tantrums in front of the maids to call the man, who has already become the count for conversation. The entire top of the empire is filled with squirming snakes, and they don't even try to hide it, so no one should know about the nature of their secret meetings. The hero asks if it is true that he was originally supposed to be taught 10 subjects, language, mathematics, history, religion, military affairs, magic, art, self-defense, politics, and horse riding. The Count confirms this, but in reality the Emperor will only study 5 of them: language, religion, history, art, and horse riding. He continues to say that the region's people will take care of language and horse riding, the Chancellor will take care of religion and art, and history will be conducted by Herc as a representative of the neutral party. These people said that they would look at the rest of the items as they went along. Carmine grins and repeats these words about reviewing the case. It is obvious to him that those people do not want the Emperor to understand anything about politics or military affairs. The Count agrees with him. The hero says that this is excellent. Now all that remains is for them to force Herc to give up his role and put Count Voted in his place. History must be taught by a representative of the neutral faction, no matter who it is. The boy knows that Herc may act like a neutralist, but in reality he is in cahoots with Chancellor Karl de Van Raoul. Count Voted is not against it, but surely the hero is not going to do anything with the other subjects. Carmine believes that language, art, and horse riding are not subjects that can be distorted too much. He says that religion doesn't interest him at all. The man now understands everything. He asks if his help is needed. The hero refuses it. He can bet that the Count himself is interested in seeing what he is capable of. The boy is surprised how quickly such a lucky chance came his way. Carmine goes to the schoolroom and sees the Master of Ceremonies talking to the butler. He asks with a smile if they have become friends. The men bow in response. Philippe de Garde de Hacker says that he and His Majesty have not seen each other for a long time. The hero happily agrees. The meeting was a long time ago. The man then did well with the kingdom of Berube. It is good that the Emperor has such loyal servants. To himself, he thinks that this nonsense gives him goosebumps. The Master of Ceremonies notes the kindness towards him and says that he will continue to serve His Majesty faithfully and truly, not sparing his old bones. The boy accepts this with a smile. In fact, inside he is asking the man to quickly lean back and, if possible, take the Chancellor with him. He's infuriated that he has to watch his facial expressions so much. He thinks out loud how good it would be if Philippe de Garde Akikar visited him more often, because he doesn't see his mother at all anyway. The Master of Ceremonies is surprised and asks if this does not suit the Emperor. The boy looks back at the silent butler and answers with a serious face that it does not. And then again with a happy smile, he continues that he is still glad that he at least came, although he was told that the man does not want to see him at all. These words shock the butler. Gurkha tries to object, but Philippe de Garde Akikar waves at him and angrily asks how this happened. Carmine still cheerfully continues that he at least managed to become friends with Herc. They often communicate alone. The butler again tries to justify himself. He tells the Master of Ceremonies that this is a misunderstanding, because he did nothing wrong. The hero screams from the insult and asks forcefully if the man is really saying that the boy is lying. He remembers everything. Gurkha himself told him to be careful with his mother. He remembers it very well. The butler again tries to deny it with a trembling voice. The Master of Ceremonies asks Gurk to finish. He has already understood everything. The man sits down to be on the same level with the boy and says that he believes His Majesty. The hero accepts this with a smile. He knows it. He thinks to himself that while he can't deal with them directly, Herc was neither an enemy nor an ally for the Master of Ceremonies. But now he has doubts. Carmine thinks that the doubt may not be small, but it is a seed that will easily grow. Out loud, he says again with a smile that he hopes they will all become good friends. Eventually, his doubt will develop into suspicion, which will grow until it consumes him entirely. The Chancellor and the Regent will be at each other's throats, reducing their power, and to prevent this from escalating into a civil war, the hero will maintain the appearance of a puppet that they so desire. As the innocent emperor, the boy can easily pull off any trick right under their noses. Gurkha continues to justify himself while the hero hums a song of joy. He tells us that a little later, the Regent's faction revealed Gurkha's true identity and removed him from history lessons, and Count Voted was appointed as the new teacher. A few days later, in the Akaiker region, in Frederick's house, Timon looks at the letter and someone calls him by name. His father, a nobleman of the Regent's faction, Baron Frederick Lenan, asks his son if he is ready. The boy confirms his readiness. The man asks for forgiveness. He kneels down and explains that if their family had more power, he could refuse them. Timon interrupts, shakes his head, and says it's okay. He understands that this is also their role. The emperor is counting on them. The father agrees with him. The boy smiles sadly and says that he will go now. The Baron watches his son get into the carriage. He is very worried about him, so he turns to God. He asks him to protect this child from harm. Timon silently ponders the situation and angrily remembers the emperor. At this point, Carmine shudders violently and looks around. The Count asks what happened to His Majesty. The hero asks not to pay attention and asks if he remembered correctly that the man spoke of a supporter. Count Loaded confirms this, as the boy's actions have caused the regent's faction to suspect Sir Herc of double dealing, and he is now considered a supporter of the Chancellor. Carmine says he got what he deserved. He took bribes and reported on his every move. The man says that it is. Now the regent faction needs to find someone who will not be connected to Gurkha in any way. Carmine continues that for this purpose they have created a new position. Supporter. Now it is clear to the hero. Only the question remains. What kind of person is this supporter? The Count explains that his name is Timon Lenon. He will be 9 years old this year. His father is Frederick Lenon. These are aristocrats who joined the regent's faction. The house itself is not distinguished in any way. There are no special achievements either. The Baron is famous for his honesty, so those around him tend to trust him. The Count continues to read the report, which states that the Baron's wife died during the pandemic, and that he has been living with his son since then. Then the man notices something and falls silent. The Emperor asks what is written there. The assistant replies that nothing, and asks how His Majesty understands what a supporter is. The hero repeats these words, asks to think about it, and assumes that this is another servant. Count Voted says that he listened to the boy become a poison detector. In such a matter, it is most reliable if the taster is similar in build to His Majesty. The hero says that these people are poor fellows, since they clearly did not agree to this themselves. The man agrees with him. He did not doubt the intelligence of His Majesty, but that is not all, because the supporter also performs the function of chief escort. Carmine asks again if the Count knows what the chief escort is responsible for. Voted knows it is the cultural heritage of the Akarkar region, where Regent Alexia comes from. The boy doesn't understand. It doesn't give him anything. Maybe it means that the Count himself doesn't know the answer. The man asks him to forgive him, in which case he will get straight to the point. The position of the main escort suggests that Timon Lenon will become the favorite of His Majesty. Carmine imagines the scene with his pet with horror and asks if he is really needed for pleasure. The Count answers that this is absolutely true. The boy, with a tremor in his voice, tells how his mother said she wanted him to have someone he could call a friend. Voted says that this is also part of the main chaperone's job. The man explains that Mrs. Alexia clearly understands what the role of the chief escort is and approves of the culture of sodomy. So she wants to prepare in advance the man who will become the emperor's favorite in the future. The hero asks if this means that Timon's father and Timon himself have agreed to this. The Count says no, as Timon is disgusted by the culture of sodomy and his father fully understands and supports him in this. To tell the truth, the Baron had rejected all such offers from other nobles so far. In that case, the hero does not understand why he agreed now. The man says the Madame Alexia said that the Emperor is counting on them. Carmine clenches his teeth in anger. Now he realized that this was the work of the damn old woman. He didn't care who was sleeping with whom. But even the imperial family had no right to belittle and even more so force someone. The boy says out loud that he has never been interested in men. This woman simply brazenly used his name. The Count explains that such are aristocrats who have power. Lord Akikar himself was born and raised in the capital, so he is not interested in such pleasures. Regent grew up in the Akikar region, where such behavior was the norm. So Voted dares to suggest that the initiative was entirely hers. She clearly thought that men were often into such things. Carmine silently addresses her and asks her not to think that she will get away with this. One day, he will definitely finish her off. There is a knock. The hero asks who it is. The maid announces that Mr. Timon has arrived. The Count is worried that rumors may spread. Carmine suggests finishing for today and asks to bring Timon. While waiting, the boy is tossing and turning, he thinks. This is the same child as he is. Maybe if he pretends that he doesn't know anything, they will still be able to get along. The door opens, and supporter Timon Lenon comes in. The boy introduces himself and says that from today on he will be a supporter of His Majesty, which means he will carry out any of his orders. The hero also introduces himself in a friendly manner and says that he does not need such formalities. Here he looks up. He sees an incredibly angry and contemptuous look in front of him. Carmine is scared. The first impression was worse than ever. From that moment on, Timon continued to glare at the Emperor without stopping. But the hero had other concerns. The meeting coincided with the beginning of his terrible training. First came religion, taught by an aristocrat from the Chancellor's faction. The man asks if everything is clear to His Majesty. He proclaims their empire to be the only one in the world, shouting that it has the only true faith, the Western holy teaching, and everything else is heresy, which was created only to stupefy the hearts of his subjects. That is why the words of the great saint, George V, who is the younger brother of the Chancellor, can be considered absolutely true. Carmine listens to him silently. He understands that this is complete rubbish. Next came the drawing lesson, for which the Chancellor was also responsible. The teacher did nothing but praise the Lothar culture and vilify the Akakar culture. The teacher didn't even try to be honest. For every mistake, she insulted and ridiculed Timon Lenon. The boy was angry because of this. The hero sees that his murderous gaze is getting worse, but why, since Carmine himself is not guilty of anything? The next linguistics lesson was taught by a teacher from the Regent's faction, and it was even worse. Bungdart, Sacred, Lothar, Akikar, Daber, and Tanab languages spoken in the Empire. Carmine is horrified. There are too many of them. Besides these, there will also be languages from neighboring countries. Carmine asks if they are asking too much from a 6-year-old child. What is wrong with education in this country? If he tries, he might be able to remember something because a child's brain is quite flexible. But the problem is different. The hero repeats the teacher's phrases throughout the lesson. The man is happy with his success. His Majesty has excellent pronunciation. Carmine notes that they don't teach him the alphabet. He doesn't even have anything to write down. The whole lesson is in the style of heard, repeated, talked. Practice is good, but if he learns only like that, he will remain illiterate as he was. The boy is not even able to read anything. Judging from the history of his original world, it often happened that the rulers could not read. If such a king came across a document about illegal machinations, he would not be able to understand it, and therefore would not attach any importance to it. How hard is the life of an aristocrat? The hero understands that he needs to somehow learn to read. Now this is his next goal. The classes held by the neutral faction are observed by representatives of the other two factions. Count Voted is in charge of history. Carmine thinks this is a smart move. This way they will make sure that the Emperor is not told anything unnecessary. So asking the Count to teach him to write will not work. This is starting to irritate him. The man asks if His Majesty remembers the topic of the previous lesson. The boy replies that he remembers. They talked about the time before the era of the Great Schism. He begins to tell the story. The disintegrated Empire of Lothar is known in history as the Empire of Lothar. The Gil dynasty was formed in 101 BC, and before that it was called the Kingdom of Lothar. Lothar Empire period. The Gil dynasty includes the time when the country was a small kingdom. This dynasty included 20 generations of rulers, and their reign lasted 350 years. This country represented the hegemony in the West. Heavenly Mountains are a large mountain range that runs across the entire continent from north to south. On sunny days, even from the capital, you can see these majestic mountains. The hero dreams of going there someday. In 53 AD, the Lothar Empire recognized the holy teaching as the state religion. The reason lies in the Karnan state, located in the south of the country, which also preached polytheism. An unusual situation, the dominant empire fell into the influence of a country many times weaker than itself. Carmine notes to himself that the holy teaching was able to penetrate the empire at the right moment, perhaps in terms of territory and development. They were stronger, but religion is an intangible thing. It is a pity that many countries still fall under its influence. Thus, the great Empire of Lothar changed its name to the Empire of Harbarian. With its new name, the empire flourished as the largest state on the entire eastern continent. But in 220 CE, the decline began. The tyranny of the Chancellor led to a rebellion. In 222 CE, the capital was lost during the rebellion. but was eventually quickly recaptured. But this event affected the country's authority, and vassal countries gradually began to distance themselves, wanting to become independent. And as if trying to finish off the country, the Western faction and the faction of the Holy Teaching clashed with each other, which led to a civil war. One uprising followed another, and thus began the era of the Great Schism. That's all they talked about. The Count praises the hero and suggests moving on to another topic. Today, they learn about how the Bungdart Empire was formed. Carmine thinks that Loder's fan will talk about his empire. The hero has a bad feeling about it. The man says that many countries have tried to grab a piece of Lothar, so the emperor needs to be careful not to confuse them. The hero realizes that appointing him as a history teacher was a mistake. The teacher tells that in the year 248, according to the new calendar, Galkian, a mercenary from Gafor, invaded the empire. This was called the Fall of the Empire by Lothar. In the year 249, shortly before the fall of the capital, the chancellor and his henchmen fled, taking with them the treasures of the empire. And this is not even the same chancellor who caused the Great Rebellion in Tututini. The chancellor made his way to the fortress city of Haur and there ascended the throne, calling himself the true heir to the Lothar Empire, a period which is called the Lothar Empire of the Feather Dynasty. At the same time, distant relatives of the imperial family of the Gil dynasty, who managed to escape during the uprising, gathered their army. They founded their own state and called it the Empire of Lothar. Post-Gilov dynasty. The Count continues to tell that the blood of the rulers flowed in their veins, making them true successors. This gave the right to call the empire Lothar. The hero notices that here, everything went and went. The post-Gil dynasty defeated the Feeder dynasty. The empire destroyed itself because its ruler introduced laws that in their time led to the Great Uprising. The next blow came from the Lothar Empire of the Surd Nor dynasty. This dynasty was formed from the remnants of the Feeders. Their capital was the fortress city of Hawar. Now the hero understands that the Feather dynasty was able to claim the throne thanks to the treasures, and the post-Gilov dynasty had the right of blood inheritance. And the Surd Nor dynasty, Tunor dynasty, took the treasures of Feather for themselves. The Count confirms this. Carmine thinks that it turns out that, from some point of view, the Surd Nor dynasty is not connected to Lothar at all. The past is really scary. Voted notes that the Feather and Surdon Nor dynasties are sometimes called false, and then he remembers something. Traitors, fugitives, thieves, and deserters are usually called Feathers, while cheaters, hypocrites, liars, and fools are called Surd Nors, which are rather offensive nicknames. They were not the true heirs of Lothar and claimed what did not belong to them. Such a result is quite fair for them. Moreover, such a race as Feathers or Surd Nors does not exist in the modern world. Therefore, such nicknames are not racial discrimination. They are used only in relation to dirty criminals. So Voted asks to be careful in their use. Carmine wonders if this is really not the Count's personal opinion, if he told the truth, and if his words can really be trusted. Now the teacher suggests moving on to the founding of the Bungdart Empire. First, they will look at the early years. Initially, Bungdart was the name of the lands of the indigenous people who lived in the territory of the current Republic of Gafor. During the Gil dynasty, the Guard tribe living in the lands of Bungdart received the title of viceroy for their achievements before the empire. Around the same time, other native tribes were driven from their lands by the Gafur clan, and as a result, they headed to Bungdart. They joined the Guard tribe and became its junior branches. These lands were located on the very borders of the empire, so neither the Great Schism, nor the civil wars, nor the departure of vassal states affected them. But they were constantly at war with the kingdom of Gafor, and after the fall of the empire, they did not count on help. At the same time, they took on the role of protectors of the imperial family, which later led to the establishment of the post-Gil dynasty. The hero realizes that the emperor's relatives, who fled during the Great Rebellion, were hiding in Bungdarth. A marriage alliance was concluded with the people of Guard, as a result of which they received the title of Duchy, the highest title of the empire after its ruler. During the reign of the post-Gil dynasty, the capital was moved to Aduna, closer to the border. Meanwhile, the kingdom of Gafor declared itself an empire. Halcyon, who destroyed the Gil dynasty, became a hero for the people of Gafor. His grandson managed to get some of Lothar's treasure, after which he decided that the country was now an empire. The boy thinks that now Gafor has also become known as an empire. He remembers the words about treasures and wonders, why they are all so restless. The count continues. The Gaffer Empire claimed to be an empire due to its noble blood and laid claim to the Lothar lands. More accurately, they invaded the Duchy of Bungdart. It was a brutal series of battles where even neighboring countries were drawn in. The Kingdom of Graf became an empire, and after the war, they became a republic. That's why it's a war of nations. In the midst of the war, Surd Noir attacked the post-Gilevites. As a response, internal rebellions began within the House of Bungdart. The House of Bungdart, preoccupied with internal disputes, was unable to help the post-Gil dynasty, but some of the loyal soldiers managed to escape from the besieged capital, taking with them the imperial flag, coat of arms, imperial crown, and national seal. The regalia were delivered to Emperor Cardinal, who had the blood of the Gil dynasty in his veins, making him the legitimate successor of the late emperor. At that time, Emperor Cardinal was busy suppressing rebellion within his lands. Only a year later, he managed to recapture the lands of the post-Gil dynasty, after which they began an invasion of the lands of Surd Noir. On the Founders' Hill near Howard, the official coronation was held, and the empire was renamed Bungdart. The hero wonders if the result was achieved too quickly, since only a year has passed, and all this was 150 years ago. The boy understands that as a member of the imperial family, he can only believe this story. But this Emperor Cardinal, it is not known what his train of thought was really. Without careful preparation in advance, it would be impossible to advance so far. So it appears that House Bungdart has betrayed House Gil. There can be no mistake. Emperor Cardinal foresaw this outcome and waited for the right moment. Carmine wonders why Count Woden, who is so loyal to Lothar, took his side if the Bungdarts are traitors. Whether he plans to kill the Emperor or if there are details he doesn't know. The teacher suggests ending the lesson here. He praises the boys who did well. The hero at this time thinks that he needs to find out the details somehow. Baron Frederick Lenon says that he is a very ordinary man. He was born the third son in the Baron's family. He could not inherit the title anyway, so he left for the capital in the hope of getting a post as a bureaucrat. The man asked to consider this as disrespect, but the reigns of the 6th and 7th emperors were not the best, and he tried to benefit the people even in the most difficult times. His colleagues began to speak well of him, and around the same time the Baron met his faithful friend. She was better than him in everything, and tried to help him. His brothers died without leaving any heirs. The title of Baron passed to him, and he was forced to leave the capital. Frederick had a son, but an epidemic took the life of his wife. Her last words were a request to name her son Timon. Naturally, the Baron did so, and for him there is nothing more important than a child. Frederick thinks that now his son has fallen into the hands of the Emperor, who is known as a stupid puppet. The man wonders how much longer God is going to test him. There is a knock at the door. The maid tells the master that everything is ready for departure. The Baron thanks her. He will come down now. The man asks if this will be his last test and leaves. Carmine feels with sadness how Timon longs for his death. His life is constantly in danger. If he is pursued everywhere by a person with a thirst for blood, then he can get used to it and stop feeling danger. The boy was naive, even if he tried to establish a dialogue with him. The hero turns around and asks Timon if he agrees that the weather is fine today. He remains silent and continues to stare at him. Carmine thinks that this is happening day after day. It is already starting to irritate him. Today, he wants to put an end to this, according to the information received from Count Vodeta. This time, the teacher will be different. The Baron says he is pleased to meet His Majesty, and from today on, he will be his language teacher. He introduces himself and suggests they start where they left off. Timon greets his father joyfully. The man tells his son that he is now a supporter of His Majesty. He kneels down and asks him not to be angry with Timon. The Baron hopes that he does not cause problems for the Emperor. The hero replies that there are no problems, everything is great. He thinks to himself that the main problem is Timon's desire to kill him, but he can't ask him to take the boy away from him. Frederick happily says that he understands now. He asks them to sit down and offers to begin the lesson. Carmine happily begins to listen to him. The man thinks the boy is being called a stupid emperor, but it seems that this is not entirely true. The Baron writes something on the board and asks if His Majesty can read the sentence. Carmine says he can only listen and talk. He has not yet been taught to read or write. Frederick looks around at the observers and realizes what the problem is. He says out loud that now he understands everything. Then from this day on, they will study reading and writing. This surprises the emperor. Here, the former language teacher asks to wait and, turning to Sir Frederick, asks if it is too early to study this. Their job is to help the hero become a great ruler, and they, as teachers, should not burden His Majesty with unnecessary work. The hero thinks to himself that he should not interfere. The Baron asks Lord Elijah not to worry. The Lord is surprised. Frederick continues and says that His Majesty already knows the basics of all 6 languages of their country. The man notices the hero's extraordinary talent and says that it is probably due to his previous teacher. A mediocre person like the Baron can only teach him reading and writing. Lord Ilya is angry because their goal is to leave the Emperor illiterate. Does the Baron really want to destroy all the fruits of his hard work? Here Carmine intervenes. He says with a smile that he just wanted to learn something new, so he is counting on the Baron. Frederick asks if His Majesty has heard Lord Ilya. The hero wonders if everything will be all right with the Baron. The former teacher agrees, but notes that the palace does not often favor servants with such an attitude. The Baron remains silent in response. The Emperor is happy, because now he will be able to learn the letters, and when he learns to read, he will be able to receive information not only from oral sources, but also from books. He says in his mind that he forgives Timon, because his father was worth all the hero's suffering. The assistant looks at the boy questioningly. Carmine says that learning the alphabet is going smoothly, but the harder he studies, the more suspicious he will be. He dreams of reading a book, but knows that this should wait. After the Baron became his teacher, the monotony of the rest of the classes became even more tiring. In his opinion, it was all a waste of time, so he often skipped classes. The teachers keep changing like gloves, and the aristocrats still try to hammer into him only the facts that are convenient for them. The hero thinks that it is unlikely that anyone will be able to pacify the egotistical emperor. Thanks to this, the hero became a lover of horse riding, although he is allowed to ride only within the palace itself, and is always accompanied by the aristocrat's guard dog. Well, at least this way he can see the surroundings of the mansion, and for that he is grateful. Then the boy notices something. He does not know how to address the escort. He does not know who this old man is. The man says that he is Count Bunra, and his name is Hubert La Alman. He is a man from the Chancellor's faction. He is the captain of the Royal Guard. Carmine says that it is now clear to him and asks what kind of tower this is. The Count also looks at the tower and says with a smile that an innocent maiden is imprisoned in it. The boy thinks that this has something to do with the regent and notices that Hubert speaks of such horror with a smile. The man continues to tell that the girl's name is Vera Sylvie Le Chapelle. She is the daughter of Count Chamont, who was the concubine of His Majesty's father. The hero understands everything. He seems to have heard about her. The funerary is an unforgettable story, or rather a story that he should never forget. With his birth, the regent took power into his hands, and on the same day the faith was taken into custody, and has been there ever since. The Count says that this must have been facilitated by Madame Norn de Alman, Marchioness of Maldors. Carmine asks again if he heard correctly about Alman. The captain confirms his words. He and they are distant relatives. It pains him to know that his family is capable of such a thing, which is why he cannot help but worry about Vera Sylvie Le Chapelle. The hero notes to himself that the man would not have remembered her if he had not asked, but says out loud that he feels sorry for her. The Count smiles broadly, laughs, and asks if this means that His Majesty agrees with him. The boy thinks that he may be a child, but he can't put his emotions on display so obviously. He can see how he can't wait to do another dirty trick to the regent. Carmine says he's in a bad mood and suggests they move on. He mentally sighs heavily and thinks that things couldn't get any worse. The hero is enraged by the regent. He is enraged by this political squabble. And what's more important, he is enraged by his powerlessness, because he can't help even one girl. The hero says that lately history lessons have become increasingly boring. Not the Count voted is to blame for this. There's a so-called taboo. For everyone it is different, depending on the person's position and status. The boy thought that the aristocrats had come up with this rule only to make their lives easier. It was a rule for raising stupid puppets that were easy to control. reading and writing, military knowledge, martial arts training, and magic sharpen the emperor's skills. The emperor's meetings with the people should not be forgotten either. Anything that is inconvenient for aristocrats immediately becomes taboo and forbidden knowledge. One can forget about a good education. The hero thinks that he is not very interested in the achievements of past emperors, but because of this taboo, he is only told about good deeds. For example, now they jumped from the first emperor straight to the third, Cardinal, the first emperor of Bongdarda. Carmen himself has heard this story more than once. He is a famous monarch, known to the whole country. Because of his achievements, even commoners do not dare to name their children after him, as is considered disrespectful. In stories, he's described as a superior being who cannot be approached. He seemed to be an excellent strategist. Within a year, he managed to reclaim all the lands of the post-Gilliv dynasty. After this, they moved to Howl, the capital of the Surd Noirs. The hill that existed on the border of the lands of Emperor Cadnal was called the Founder's Hill. After this announcement, the emperor left the front. This marked the beginning of the founding ceremony. The people rejoiced at his return, saying that the emperor was their hope. When it became clear that Cadnal had left for the capital, Surd Noir sent all his troops in the hope of delivering a crushing blow. Upon learning of this, Cadnal immediately moved to the aid of the troops. Carmine reasons that the tactic of first showing himself on the battlefield and then suddenly leaving shows that he was clearly provoking Surd Noir to attack. The hero says out loud that Emperor Cadnal is amazing. The Count agrees with him. The Emperor showed himself brilliantly, but he was good not only in military affairs. The man says that Lothar's empire once split into 5 independent states, and it took 9 years to unite them. They say that he was completely invincible on the battlefield, which is why he is the founding emperor. The boy regretfully notes the all-too-obvious pressure. Something tells him that the emperor had a trump card that they don't want to tell him about. He'll have to study his biography more thoroughly later. The great project to restore Lothar also included the conquest of the kingdoms of Akikar and Tenebe, but the invincible commander was broken by an enemy he did not expect: illness. The emperor died without completing his plan. The second emperor was the heavy Edward I. He was the eldest son of Cadnal and continued his father's work, adding Akikar to the empire. He, in turn, died when he was 38 years old. Before his death, he managed to complete the construction of the capital. The happy emperor, Charles I, the younger brother of the second emperor. During his reign, he was able to repel the invasion of the Gafor people, and that was all he achieved. The hero notices that everything is said too briefly. It is immediately obvious that all the inconvenient parts of his biography are simply omitted, and no one even tries to hide it. Is Count Voted really pointing out his taboo in this way? The Count tries to help him as best he can, even forcing him to take notes on these boring lessons. He told the observers, who had nothing to say in response, that the emperor would remember better if he wrote it down. It was Baron Frederick who taught him to write, not the palace or the local aristocracy. Thanks to him, he can finally read and write. Carmine doesn't know what he was thinking, but it's awesome. Let the palace eat it. With reading and writing, the boy was able to expand his knowledge despite all the attempts of the nobles to stop him. Well, it must be admitted, the hero slightly hates this whole aristocracy and the Baron's determination. Carmine turns to Baron Renan. The man asks what happened. The hero asks where the word spherical comes from. The man explains that this is another designation for the round world, a term often found in the Holy Scriptures. Surely the emperor didn't know. The boy asks if Timon knew about this. He says with a smile that he knew because his father told him. Carmine thinks that the boy is just white and fluffy in front of his father. Frederick understands now, but this is one of the topics that a hero must know. Well, then today they will talk about it. The Baron asks what Carmine learned in religion classes. The hero curses, because he ran away from them more often than he studied. He says out loud, stuttering, that the main principle is to adhere to the teaching of God left by Ain, and the Western school is the main religion. The Baron looked back silently at the observers and says that they will begin with the teaching of God. This is a collection of the exaltations of Saint Ain. His students have compiled a list of sayings. This is the Holy Scripture, Among these sayings, the emperor can find one that says that the world is round. The hero is very surprised. He did not think that in this world they already knew about gravity and the rotation of the planets. Frederick notices that the student quickly grasps the point. He asks if His Majesty knows about seas and ships. The hero happily says that he knows. He has never seen them, but he imagines what they are. The Baron listens to this with a smile and says that having received the revelation of the oracle, Saint Ain and his followers set off on a sea voyage on a ship. Carmine remembers hearing this story at a funeral and wonders if it's true. In those days, people believed that the world was flat and there was nothing above the sea. Feeling the uneasiness of his people, Saint Ain called on them to look. He told them that their continent was nowhere to be seen, and that this was all because the planet was actually round. The hero thinks about the horizon line and remembers that it seems that something similar happened in ancient Greece. Among the scientists of that time, theory of the round world was widespread. The story does not end there. The Baron continues to tell that divine power made their world boundless. As long as they keep faith, misfortunes are not terrible to them. Now it is clear to the hero. So they attributed the scientific fact to the merits of God in the New World. New religions. Frederick says that the holy teaching has broken up into several schools and asks if His Majesty knows about these schools. The boy says no, because they only studied the Western school. The Baron understands everything. Then he suggests that they immediately consider the history of these schools and their differences. This does not please the observers very much. The Baron says that initially the ideas of the inevitable end of the world were promoted on the continent. Several schools of holy teaching still adhere to this idea. The Baron's story can be shortened. After the death of Saint Ain, the teachings were divided into 3 schools: the school of the emperor, the school of the emperor, the school of the inheritance, and the school of the guardians of knowledge. The continent has a large mountain range running from north to south. The holy teaching originated in the countries to the east of the mountain range and was followed by the Empire of Tiva. Later it became a sacred country guarded by the holy Ain himself, and the official religion became the school of the emperor. According to its teachings, on the day when the world ends, only the empire will survive, for it is sacred land. The empire actively sponsored the creation of temples and places of pilgrimage, with the number of believers increasing every day. The School of Heritage believed that the sacred land was the place where Saint Ain landed on his ship. There was a school of knowledge keepers who doubted the correctness of the interpretation of the Holy Scriptures and constantly started arguments. They doubted that the end of the world was mentioned there, and no one said that one should pray in a temple. Carmine thinks that religion changes over time. He wonders where the term Holy Scripture came from and who was the first to question the interpretation of Saint Ain's words. But he understands that they will never know. The Baron continues to tell how time passed. New schools began to appear. Reformists from the school of the emperor, and those who doubted the school of the keepers of knowledge united together. The school of holy truth spread its teachings to countries at odds with the empire. There was also a split in the school of heritage. The fundamentalists decided to separate and created the school of return. Initially, the official religion of the Lothar Empire was the school of heritage. But this school believed that the sacred land was the landing place of Saint Ain, which was located in the territory of a vassal state subordinate to the empire. The empire could not agree with the aggressive desire of the heritage school to return their sacred land to them, so the empire created the Western school. Carmine wonders if this means that the empire has created a religion for itself that will not contradict their basic policy. The Baron notes that the history of the formation of the Western school is very different from that of other schools. He says that some even consider the Western school to be heresy. Timon and the observers at this point become very serious, and the emperor is afraid whether he can even tell him about this. Frederick continues that, in his opinion, the Western school contributes to the development of their country, because it respects the customs of their region. He says that now the holy teaching is the hope for people, and the basic principles of the school support this hope in people. The man emphasizes that the basis of the Western school is harmony. Happy Frederick sincerely hopes that the emperor will not use her as a weapon to subjugate other peoples. At this point, he ends the lesson. The hero notices that it is quite obvious that the Baron has just told him part of the taboo. He looks back at the lords, who continue to watch everything silently. Carmine is silent for a while. Because of a bad feeling and with a forced smile, tells the Baron that it was very interesting and exciting. He hopes that he will tell him many more new and interesting things. The man smiles. The hero thought that these observers would try to grab the Baron, but they were just standing there. Would they really just ignore it? At that moment, he felt relieved and looked forward to the next lessons with the Baron. Carmine realized how naive he had been. A few days later, Timon disappeared, and Count Woded reported that Baron Renan had fallen victim to the Inquisition. The man says that until now he was the hands and feet of Count Vodita. Knowing the dark side of the Empire, he did any dirty work for him. He has come to the decision to live in a world different from secular society, so that he does not expect to die a peaceful death in his bed. He could suddenly be stabbed, strangled, poisoned. He is ready to risk his own life to fulfill the mission. However, a problem arose. He was not at all prepared to be burned alive. Carmine threatens him and orders him to answer quickly. The man does not understand where he feels such pressure from. He slowly says that he will take the Emperor. Baron Renan continues to be tortured. The Inquisitor calls out to Frederick and asks if he will continue to remain silent. His Holiness George V says that he has always been stubborn. The man is confident that even though they cannot execute the Baron as a heretic, they know exactly what he taught His Majesty. George V demands that the Inquisitor do whatever he wants, but beat a confession out of him, since the authority of Western teaching is at stake. The man is not very keen to do this. The Baron calls His Majesty at this time. The hero notices that several days have passed since the disappearance of Baron Renan and his son. He thinks about the report of Count Vodeta, according to which Timon was placed under house arrest, and the Baron was arrested by the Inquisition. Carmine realizes that he has relaxed too much. He was too carried away by the emergence of new and high-quality information. The boy calls himself a blockhead. He can survive as long as he plays the role of the fool emperor, but he can't let them do whatever they want with his benefactor. The hero irons himself and gets off the bed. He needs to try. The maid asks what happened. Carmine thinks he's had enough. The girl tries to appeal to the emperor again, but he uses magic, and she falls asleep. The hero leaves the room. The boy uses magic again to find out what is happening above him. He sees the man and notices that this is great. He is here today too. Carmine calls him. Then he sighs heavily. The man notices something and is surprised. The hero uses magic again. He threateningly orders to come down here. The guard is very scared. He comes down and kneels before the emperor. Carmine is angry that he has taken too long. The man is silent from fear. The boy orders him to be taken to Count Vodeta. The shadow guard asks him to think again. The hero sighs heavily again, bends down and speaks threateningly, using fire magic, which he seems not to quite understand. The threat is that he either does what he is told or dies right here. The man gets even more scared and agrees to take the emperor away. The boy interrupts the magic. This is all creating so many problems. They leave the room. The hero thinks he has developed the spell for such a case. Barrier spell. Common version is a magical barrier with a reflective surface. If he covers himself with such a barrier, even mana-sensitive mages won't be able to detect it. He then casts a barrier spell, a version of shoes to prevent dirt from getting on his feet, thus hiding all traces of him going outside. The boy thanks the guy for waiting for him. The guard nods silently, and they set off at a run. The hero notices that this is not good. The child's body is not ready for this. He is already out of breath, although it's more likely that the guy is running too fast. Carmine wonders if he's leading him in circles. The hero stops and decides to check, because he is not just some kind of full emperor. He uses magic. Carmine orders the golem's servant to appear. The guard is very scared when a golem appears nearby, carrying the emperor in his arms. The guy stutters that they are already close. Carmine asks if this is the building. The guard says that there shouldn't be any more problems. There is no one else nearby except them. At this time, Count Voded is working with documents. He hears something and opens the window, from where he sees a running golem. The man is surprised and frightened when the emperor jumps and lands on the windowsill, the barrier that was hiding him breaking around him. The count asks if the hero is really that strong. Carmine says he thought Count Voded had already assumed this. The man replies that he was aware of its uniqueness, since the emperor is able to use magic in the palace, but not this. The hero realizes that this means that using magic indoors is truly unusual. The count notes that if the boy had been born into another family, He could have become an influential magician. Carmine wonders if the man is saying that his only path is to be emperor. He asks out loud if Wadid understands why he is here. The man remains silent and asks His Majesty to sit down. As he had said before, his escort, Timon Leinan, is under house arrest and under surveillance. Baron Frederick Leinan has been accused of heresy and is in custody, under investigation by the Inquisition. The Count believes that they want to beat a confession out of him and then execute him. The hero asks if they really didn't like his classes after all. Voted says that, to be more precise, they didn't like the last sentence, where the Baron sincerely hoped that the Emperor would not use her as a weapon to subjugate the peoples. Carmine thought the problem was that Frederick Lenant had exposed the origins of religions. He wondered out loud how he was supposed to understand that. The Count explains that the country, particularly the Duchy of Raoul, is currently hunting down various groups who practice other religions and forcibly converting them to Western schools, a policy promoted by the great patron saint, George V. The hero now understands, in other words, that this is revenge for criticizing the actions of Western teaching before the Emperor. However, the boy still does not understand why he was not arrested on the spot. The man replies that it is most likely due to the fact that the Baron belonged to the Regent's faction, not the Chancellor's. Carmine ponders what this means. The faction simply abandoned the Baron. Then he answers himself that this is not so. They are constantly waging war with the Chancellor. Every person counts. The hero wants to know what the Master of Ceremonies received in exchange for the Baron. The Count asks His Majesty to think again. Carmine says forcefully that he has already thought it all through. Voted draws his attention to the fact that the Emperor is losing his cool. The hero thinks that he is right. It is difficult for him to think calmly. He supposes that these are perhaps the limitations of his small body, but there is something else. He turns to Count Vodeta. Carmine declares that he stands at the very top of the world. But if he is not able to save even his own teacher, then who will recognize him as Emperor at all? He says firmly that he will not change his mind. They exchange glances. The man sighs and accepts the Emperor's words. He says that this incident is not exactly connected with the Chancellor. The Count explains that it was a personal request from George V. One might say that His Holiness has his own faction. The hero wonders if this means that there are differences of opinion within the Chancellor's faction. Voted says the same can be said about the Regent's faction. The Regent and the Master of Ceremonies have differences of opinion. At the very least, the Master of Ceremonies does not want to see a woman in politics. Carmine ponders these words. For some reason, he had assumed something like this. In that case, it is quite possible that it was George V who convinced the Regent to bring Timon to him. He asks what it means that it was not the Regent who handed over the Baron, but the Master of Ceremonies. The Count replies that the Regent must not even know that they were captured. The hero asks if there is anything else. The man says he understands the Chancellor was informed of the deal, and he believes he wanted to make sure George V did not use his power against him. They may be brothers, but they are wary of each other. The boy understands that the struggle between the factions is intensifying, and it is clear to him that both factions have their own conflict of interests. The Regent was not informed about this case, so George V acted at his own discretion. Maybe the Emperor will be able to act. Voted notices that His Majesty is unable to act. The boy knows this. He must be unaware of these events now. He will do nothing until they tell him about the arrest. The Count says that this is natural, but he himself would advise him not to do anything, even after they tell. He asks His Majesty not to expose himself to even the slightest risk. After that, the man falls silent and gives him a chance to think about his words. Carmine thinks that he understands why he took such a position. Until he regains power, it is better to continue to play the role of the fool emperor. However, the Baron will be forced to confess and execute it. The hero cannot close his eyes to such permissiveness. The boy again turns to Count Vodita and says that sometimes the most reasonable move is not the best. He asks him not to worry, because the result will justify the risk. Carmine wonders how he will bear the burden of an entire country if he can't even save his teacher. The problem is how long the Baron can resist the Inquisition. The boy asks Baron Leinan to rely on him. A week has passed since the disappearance of the father and son. There has still been no news of Baron Renan's death, which means he is still alive. Then someone appears at the door. Hertz Butler, he tells His Majesty that it is time. The hero agrees. In his past life, he had a niece. Every day, the memories of her become more and more faded. He barely remembers her face and name, but he clearly remembers how she showed that she didn't like him. Logic doesn't apply to children. They don't even know what adults are talking about. The boy is surprised. Who would have known that he would follow his niece's example? Childish whims that cannot be stopped by a reasonable approach. He wonders what the nobles will do if their emperor behaves like this. Now he will see it. The hero notices someone. The man says he is pleased to meet the emperor. He is Count Vapo. His name is Carlos Lavapo. He is the emperor's adjutant, belonging to the regent's faction. From today on, he will be teaching language classes. Carmine thinks that this is his new teacher. He mentally apologizes to him, because they will have to use him. The count notices how the boy smiles brightly. Here the emperor's face changes. He asks who the count is. What happened to Baron Ronin? The hero demands to bring him here quickly. The man starts to get angry. He repeats that from today on, he will be the one teaching the classes. Carmine interrupts him and forcefully declares that he does not need him. If they understood everything, they should bring Baron Rainin. Aristocrats are driven by pride, so it is easy to find the right words, especially when a brat like him is talking to them. The boy waits for the count to say the words he needs. The man says with a slight smile that he is sorry, but the Baron is under arrest. Carmine smiles widely. The aristocrat has fallen for the trick. The count continues to say that he cannot bring such a heretic to his majesty. The hero thinks that he now officially knows that the Baron is in prison. He thanks the stupid aristocrat. The boy, with bewilderment and naivety on his face, asks again how he could be under guard. He was not aware of who could have done this without his knowledge. He asks to simply let the Baron go, and that's it. Carlos Levadpo starts to chuckle and tells His Majesty that it is impossible. Carmine asks again how it is impossible. He understands that if a child is raised correctly, he will understand when he is told no. But he is not one of those children. The hero shouts that he is an emperor. Is the count really not going to follow the orders of his emperor? The man tries to deny it and come up with a reason for refusing. But the boy interrupts him by quickly rushing past. He turns and says that he understands that the man is going to stand his ground. Carlos now denies it louder. It is not true at all. The emperor at this time calls for the guards. They say that they are here. Carmine points his finger at the count and orders the guards to kill him because he insulted the emperor. The men try to refuse. Carmine thinks that his words now have no logic. He asks out loud what but, and again orders to kill Carlos quickly. Now everything is clear to the boy. The guards sigh with relief, and the hero continues. They also dare to contradict their emperor. No one taught him logic. The guards are very scared. Now for everyone, Carmine is a psycho emperor who suddenly wanted to kill a man, deciding that they themselves could not cope here. One of the guards called those who could stop the emperor. He called the chancellor and the master of ceremonies. The hero told them the same reason. The man he liked was put in prison. He had no idea about it, and he also managed to insult the emperor. By intertwining childish selfishness with facts, and by dragging in rebellious behavior, he made the statement that if someone does not obey him, he is a traitor. And traitors want to kill the emperor, so he must kill them first. They were the first to take power from the emperor, to do whatever they wanted with this country. The strings snap. Carmine continues to shout that the man who locked the Baron up must also be killed. The puppet is freed. Be innocent. Be stupid. Be naive. Be good-natured. That's the kind of emperor they raised. But what happens if the puppet emperor stops listening to them? They must remember this. Although these were just childish whims, in reality, no one had died yet. The chancellor and the master of ceremonies promised to look into the matter, and everyone, including Count Vodpo, hurried away. Carmine thinks they are going to investigate if they already know all this. Everything goes as he planned. The boy runs out of the room. There will be problems further, because it turns out that not all factions agree with the actions of George V. The hero remembers asking his mother what she was doing. She asked him not to trust Duke Raoul, because he was clearly up to something bad. Now he understands that she apparently doesn't like the chancellor, and the master of ceremonies tries to stay away from politics. The chancellor, who doesn't like it when people interfere in his affairs, and the master of ceremonies, who doesn't want to involve his daughter in his affairs, their interests coincided here. Carmine knows that the two will soon be united. which means he must bring the regent into play. This is his chance to sow discord between the two factions that have declared a temporary truce and split them into 4 smaller ones. The hero bursts into his mother's room with tears in his eyes and screaming. She sympathetically asks what happened to His Majesty. The boy throws himself into her arms and asks his mother for help. A breathless maid runs in after him. The woman stops her. Carmine grabs his mother by the dress and, with an innocent look, tells her that the Chancellor, without permission, imprisoned Baron Renan and Timon, whom she brought for him. In fact, Timon should not have been touched at all. He thinks that the Chancellor's servants got the go-ahead from the Master of Ceremonies and decided to act independently. But he is a child. Why can't he make a mistake and say the wrong thing? The regent asks how this is to be understood. The boy continues to cry and say that they don't listen to him. They ignore him. He presses himself tighter and complains that they probably want to start a riot. So he will kill them all. Among them, there is also a Master of Ceremonies. The hero said only once that he wanted the Baron back, and then there were only words about how he would punish them. But they themselves are to blame for not listening to him. The mother leans over to her son and promises to get them out. Carmine happily asks if this is true, if she is not lying. She replies that, of course not, she will definitely fulfill his request. The hero thanks her. In such a situation, he can only rely on his mother. In front of her, he cries with happiness, but in his soul, he gloats and smiles. The boy thinks that the regent will soon find out that the Master of Ceremonies also approved the Baron's conclusion. However, if she goes back on her word, she risks causing him displeasure. But if she does everything right, she will earn his trust and may even be able to return to politics. The merits of the Master of Ceremonies' daughter can also help him, so that they can put pressure on the Chancellor's faction with their combined efforts. If this happens, the Chancellor will definitely try to leave with minimal losses, and words will be said that it was his brother who gave the order without his permission. George V is the leader of the Western School. No matter how much the region rebels, they will not be able to remove him from office. But they can ruin his reputation. With the Emperor's trust, the region will be able to actively intervene in politics, and the region's faction will have 2 leaders. And George V will not remain silent either after all the blame has been thrown on him, because this could ruin the reputation of Western teaching. A split will form within the Chancellor's faction. Carmine hopes that they will gradually destroy each other. So, he and Count Voted will weaken 2 factions. Such a game is worth the candle. The Count will not complain. The hero himself just wants to save Baron Renan. He did everything he could. All that remains is to wait. Carmine thinks that life without regrets really doesn't exist. Everyone has had regrets, both big and small. Perhaps that's the very essence of human life. This also concerns him. So in this life, he tried to live without regrets. After being reborn in this world, he found out that he is an emperor. The adults around him only want to use him, and only one person has shown him genuine kindness. Carmine wonders if he can live without regrets, if he doesn't repay him. The day after the Emperor's rampage begins, the hero meets Count Vodita. He joyfully asks if the Baron has already been freed. The man confirms this. The Baron and his son were released. Now they are healing their wounds in the guest house. It seems the Emperor's recent hysteria made even George V's people nervous. Even though he was a child, he was still an emperor, and if they continued to resist the hero's will, they would be accused of obstructing the law. So they decided not to take any risks. But there is one problem, and the man wants to tell about it. But Carmine says that everything suits him. He must visit the Baron as soon as possible. After these words, he runs away. The Count can only silently watch him go. He knows what the hero will see there. The man thinks it's a necessary part of growing up. The hero runs and laughs. He did it. He saved Baron Renan. Now the aristocrats can bite. Now he won't let them do whatever they want. Then the hero notices Timon, then approaches him and asks what happened. The boy first starts talking, then falls silent and turns away. Carmine is frightened by this reaction and quickly runs into the room. There he is met by a doctor. The hero looks at the man in bed and is shocked by what he sees. He doesn't understand how this could have happened. Carmine thought everything was fine, thought he had managed to save his benefactor, but in reality he was too late. Frederick quietly calls His Majesty. The boy leans towards him, calls him, asks if he can hear. He does not need to force himself to speak. The man asks to leave them alone. The doctor understands everything and asks His Majesty to call if help is needed. The hero agrees and begins to use magic. The Baron calls His Majesty again. Carmine asks what he wants to say. Frederick replies that he wanted to say thank you because he saved him. The hero quietly says that he actually didn't have time. The Baron smiles and carefully rises. After all, nothing can be hidden from the Emperor. He breathes heavily and asks if it is true that His Majesty has magic. The boy is silent at first, and then says that he knows he taught himself something. The man says that he knew it, and then asks if the people around him know. Carmine says no one knows except Count Fodita and a couple of his subordinates. Frederick understands what it means. He was not mistaken. The hero looks questioningly at the man. He begins to unbutton his jacket and shows his body. The boy wonders what it is. The Baron explains that this is partial magic rejection syndrome, a disease in which the mana inside the body suddenly begins to rage. Tissues begin to break down. Over time, it spreads throughout the body and death occurs. Modern medicine has not yet come up with a cure for this disease. The hero accepts this with regret. Frederick asks not to worry. The disease is not dangerous for those who know how to consciously manipulate mana. In other words, there is no threat to His Majesty. It is a rare disease that only affects those who do not possess magic. The boy now understands everything. He hangs his head low. The man notices this and asks what happened. The hero asks the Baron to forgive him. The man knew he had little time left. He chose to take a risk and speak out against the church, rather than die from illness. Carmine now realizes that he acted frivolously. He begins to cry, because he does not know how to calm the mana raging in another body. The hero believed that he could help his benefactor. The Baron looks at this with surprise. Carmine continues to cry. He can't even cope with one illness. He continues to ask for forgiveness, because he can't do anything right. Frederick wipes away his tears and says that His Majesty is still too kind. The man then asks if His Majesty knows how many people live in his country. The boy replies that he does not know. Then the Baron says that there are about 30 million people in the country, and asks if His Majesty understands. He shouldn't have to risk himself to save one person. The burden of protecting 30 million people lies on his shoulders. The Emperor will kill tens of thousands of people and lead 30 million inhabitants of the empire behind him. And such a trivial question does not deserve his attention. Carmine agrees with him. As an emperor he is. Here the hero pauses and thinks to himself that he is unreasonably weak and pathetic. He was born an emperor. He thought that there was something special in him, but in the end he is the most ordinary person. The Baron continues and says that he sees a ray of hope in the Emperor. The boy looks questioningly at the smiling man, turns away from him and says that he does not understand what kind of hope he is talking about, because he does not even know what the right thing to do is. Frederick asks him to leave everything as it is and live the way he wants. His suffering will only cause him to wander in circles, but the Baron is confident that the Emperor will be able to find the right path. Carmine asks again with horror. He couldn't save the man. How will he find the right path then? The Baron replies that His Majesty saved him. He can't even imagine how he helped him. The boy looks at him doubtfully and says that he would prefer a more specific answer. The man will forgive only moving forward and leaving behind a path for others to follow. This is the role of the Emperor. Carmine, after these words, begins to cry again. He rubs his eyes, jumps up, and says that this is all he could expect from his teacher. It was a great lesson. Now it is time for him to go, and the Baron needs a good rest. Frederick Leynon thanks His Majesty for his concern. The hero leaves the room and calls Timon. He says that there is nothing more he can do for his father. He is truly sorry that this happened to the Baron. Timon grabs the Emperor in response. The boy asks His Majesty not to apologize, because the Pope, that is, Frederick Leynon, did not criticize the church so that the Emperor would apologize later. His father was not wrong in anything, and the hero tried to help. That is enough for him. So Timon asks His Majesty not to bow his head. Carmine quietly says that they both have truly taught him a lot. He wipes the boy's tears and asks him to pull himself together. After this, the hero declares that from this moment on he removes Timon's attendant from this position and asks to remain next to the Baron. This is the Emperor's order. Timon gathers his forces. He gets down on one knee and says that he will gladly carry out His Majesty's order. Timon sits at his father's bedside. Frederick asks if he heard everything. The boy confirms that he did. The Baron notes that His Majesty is not a stupid child emperor, but that he has potential that could outshine even the first emperor's achievements. Timon starts to cry and agrees with his father. The Baron asks him to help His Majesty. From now on is his task. The boy says that he obeys. He will definitely become a sword and shield for His Majesty. Then the man puts his hand on his head. He asks his son to pull himself together. Timon remembers that the emperor said the same words. The Baron was cared for by his son for the next 3 days, and the Baron took his last breath in peace and quiet. Baron Leinan's funeral was quiet, with only his closest friends and relatives present. When Timon asked the hero to attend, he refused, because excessive support could attract unnecessary attention to them. Carmine believes that he did the right thing when he decided not to go. Unlike the priests and their prayers for the dead, he is overcome by the desire to kill. 2 weeks have passed since then. Timon has returned to his post. At the moment, he asks permission to take his leave. The hero lets him go, because he did a great job. He thinks that Timon has been acting too polite around him lately. Apparently, he is not going to leave his post as his assistant, and in the evenings, Count Voted teaches him martial arts. It is as if a completely different person is in front of the hero. This scares him. Although, perhaps this is normal since the Count took up his training. The palace is currently in uproar over his hysteria, which occurred after a person dear to him was sent to prison without his knowledge. At this rate, there is a high chance of splitting the factions. Naturally, the Chancellor will try to prevent this. Every day, nobles, supporters of George V, come to the hero for an audience, and everyone is eager to receive his approval. It seems that the Master of Ceremonies has handed over his powers to the regent and returned to the Duchy of Akikar. The boy does not understand why he would return there at such a time. Did something really happen there? The public does not see the confusion caused by the regent's return to political affairs. Judging by the information received, the internal conflict between the factions is flaring up even more intensely. Now the hero needs to show himself. He decides to pull the wool over both factions' eyes by telling them what a great job they are doing. The boy goes into the room and sees the butler, who calls His Majesty. Carmine says that he is going to his room. If there is anything needed, let them send a message. The men bow slightly and say that it will be done. Here, the hero overhears their conversation. The second man turns to the butler, Herc, and says that they cannot allow Hackley's madness to happen again. Herc notes that this is a perfectly reasonable idea. Carmine does not know what Huxley is. Evening comes. Count Voted conducts training for Timon. The boy defends himself vigorously. The man makes a sharp lunge and delivers a powerful blow to the unsuspecting opponent. The boy jumps back and barely manages to dodge. The man is serious. Voted delivers another blow with his sword, then trips Timon, causing him to fall. He hits his head and cries out in pain. The Count points his sword at the boy and says that 10 days have passed since the start of their training, and he does not notice any progress. The man suggests that Timon's supporters surrender. Shadow guards are watching them. One of them asks if this is the boy from the Akikar region. The second confirms it. This is the main escort of His Majesty. The first remarks that as His Majesty's favorite, he should have sat quietly and not stood out. The first replies that as escorts, they also act as bodyguards. The first wants to add something else. Then a girl comes up to them and tells them that this boy's father recently passed away. The first one says that the title of Baron passed to his distant relative because the guy is still too young. The second one notes that he could have taken advantage of the hype and returned to his native land. He does not understand why he clings so much to the title of escort. The girl also does not know the answer, but the boy's attitude towards His Majesty changed. He began to respect him. This was in the reports of other spies. The first one laughs. Could this boy really have seriously fallen in love with His Majesty? The girl says that it is quite possible. She does not understand something else, why the head personally took up his training. The second one answers that it is the head's personal business. Maybe he thinks that extra cannon fodder never hurts. The first one begs for a while. Then he notices that the kid is holding up well for someone who lost his father and his title. The Count comes to the Emperor's room. The hero is surprised to himself, because even he didn't hear whether this man is really an aristocrat. He asks out loud if something urgent has happened. The Count says no. Then the boy doesn't understand why he came. He decides to skip this and says that he has a question for the Count. He is interested in what Hackley's madness is. The man understands that the hero most likely heard this from the Chancellor's people. He is ready to explain everything. The Count begins to tell that Halclea was the empress of the third ruler after the Gilaf dynasty. The boy is surprised. He thought that Halclea was a place, not a person. By that time, the empire was in decline, and the early death of the emperor only accelerated the process. To ascend to the throne, the third emperor killed all the brothers. Only the sister survived. Carmine asks that he did not rule for long because he died young. The Count confirms this. The official cause of death was illness. The hero wonders if this means that the key link after the emperor's death was his sister. Again, everything is correct. The Count says that even before the beginning of the struggle for the throne, the third emperor handed over his sister to the Bungdart tribe. Her eldest son was a cardinal, Duke of Bungard. Now the boy understands how it all happened. That is why Emperor Cardinal expanded his territory so quickly, and why the nobles obediently followed him. Here the hero guesses something and asks to wait. He asks about the fact that the story seems to end with the words the Cardinal was found and ascended the throne. The Count says that this is not quite so. He asks His Majesty if he remembers how the Bungdart tribe got their title. The boy replies that he does. From the Empire's point of view, the tribes living on the border were little different from Barians, and they are nothing like them. Huxley Empire, naturally, was of the same opinion. She was against the throne going to someone in Bungdart blood, so she adopted her younger brother's son and made him the fourth emperor. The child was still too young to rule. Apparently, she was trying to seize power in this way. As a result of her reign, the Third Noir dynasty was formed, and many nobles went over to the side of Duke Bungdarth. Hating the barbarians, Hacklea refused to give any support to Emperor Cardinal. The hero ends by saying that soon after, the post-Gillian dynasty collapsed. The Count says that it is all true. Now, Carmine asks if this means that by Hacklea's madness is meant the complete transfer of power into the hands of the regent. The man also confirms this. Now everything is clear to the hero, although he is sure that his mother would not do this. Then he remembers something and asks why the Count came. He decides to explain it. The man reports that the northern region of Tenevi is trying to achieve independence. The boy understands that the Count has come to tell him about a situation in which he himself cannot intervene. Carmine smiles and asks for more details. Timon calls his father. He asks him to wait for him. The Baron turns around and says that it is time for him to go. Frederick believes that from this moment a new era is beginning, so the son must be strong. The boy wakes up after these words. He quietly addresses his father. Timon dresses and remembers that his father was a kind and decent man, a model of a steadfast aristocrat. The boy slaps his cheeks. He vows to be His Majesty's support and bids farewell to his father as he leaves the room. The Baron's glasses are on the table. The northern border is the Tenebe region. It borders Tomi Sassanaki, the Kingdom of Eri, the Grand Duchy of Gyuhi, and the Republic of Gafur. The region has a unique culture, and the locals speak the Tenebe language. The nobles of this region do not belong to either the Chancellor's faction or the Regent's faction. They advocate neutrality. And after gaining independence, they call themselves the Tenebe Union. The hero asks to wait and asks if he heard correctly that they are in favor of neutrality. The man says that they are. Then Carmine makes a guess that it is possible. The Count interrupts him and says that the nobles who could have become his allies have already left this country. The boy gets upset. He says that if they had remained neutral until now, then he wouldn't have needed them anyway. Then he gets an idea. Now he understands why the Master of Ceremonies left the country. Voted confirms it again. The Master of Ceremonies has a wider network of informants than the Chancellor. Or is it all a matter of distance? The hero asks again. The Count asks His Majesty to look at the map. It shows that they are currently in the capital of the empire, Cardinal. The nobles of the Chancellor's faction are located in the Duchy of Raoul, which is to the east of the capital, while the west is mostly inhabited by the nobles of the Regent's faction, which is also where the Duchy of Akikar is located. Carmine says that the Tenebe Alliance is located in the northwest. The Count replies that it is closer to the Duchy of Akikar, which means that all the events unfold practically 2 steps away from the area under the control of the Master of Ceremonies. Now the hero understands. This means that the information reached him almost instantly. The Count makes a remark that apparently the regent is completely unaware of this matter. The boy laughs. Father and daughter do not get along with each other at all. Besides, Sooner or later, Duke Raoul will also go to his lands. Carmine doesn't understand why he needs this. The Tenebe Union will most likely begin an invasion of the Empire as soon as they settle all the affairs on their lands. Voted asks to look here, as the Emperor can see. The regent's lands border the sea. Tenebe will certainly want these lands because transportation by sea is much more efficient than by land. The boy says this means that the Chancellor's lands will be left alone for a while. But still, they are the lands of his political opponent. So what business does the Chancellor have? The Count replies that everything is exactly like that. There have already been precedents when the Chancellor handed over part of the imperial territories to an enemy country. Of course, this was taking into account that the lands belonged to his political opponents. However, this time the main difference is in the enemy country. Carmine doesn't quite understand it. Voted explains that, firstly, the Tenebe region gained independence thanks to a certain trading company. They are currently investigating this matter. As soon as they have details, he will inform the Emperor. The company belongs to two countries, and they provided support. The hero interrupts him and asks if he guessed correctly that one of these countries is the religious country of Tomisasanaki. The Count asks if the hero really guessed correctly. The boy says that it is so. They went to war with the kingdom of Belub to reclaim their sacred lands, but then he got engaged to Rosalia. Eventually, Belub and Bungdart surrounded them from both sides. Tim Zasanaki. The Yuli were forced to retreat because they could not fight on two fronts. But after Tenebe gained independence, their borders became more distant. Supporting the Tenebe Union to make it a buffer zone is a cheap and effective solution. Voted notes that this is an excellent conclusion for His Majesty, but the Chancellor's concerns are not related to this. The man points to the map again. The boy asks about the Republic of Gafor. The Count asks permission to tell him a little about the Republic. In fact, they only have a name for the Republic. The common people do not control politics. It is a republic of aristocrats for aristocrats. In other words, it is an aristocratic republic where the nobles overthrew the king and appointed their own government. The will of the common people was not taken into account when the country was created. A simple history lesson from Teacher Wodita begins. The Gafor tribe settled on lands they took from the Bungdar tribe. The Bungdar tribe became nomads and migrated closer to the borders of the Lothar Empire. And the Gafor tribe grew into an empire, and they decided to move further south. But the Bungdar tribe stopped them. The Gafor Empire suffered a crushing defeat. It was this victory that brought glory to the Cardinal, the successor of the Lothar Empire, and the founder of the Bungdarth Empire, the first Emperor Bungdarth Empire. During the reign of Edward III, the sixth emperor, the law of monarchy was passed against Gafor. Under the pretext of restoring the monarchy, Bungdarth invaded the Republic twice. They were defeated. The hero now understands that Bungdart and Gafor, it turns out, have been feuding since ancient times. Voted seriously confirms this feud.